Fate. Souls and Singularities by Mundatorem Chapter 69-70. Chapter 69. One problem to replace another. Rendell continued to move around the deck of the ship as he avoided being caught out by two of the archers whilst also attempting to avoid Sanora. The Lion Knight swiped the spear through the air towards his side the moment he stopped. Raising the flat of his blade, he blocked the polearm of the weapon. Sanora grunted as she pulled the spear back towards her. The cross-section just underneath the spear tip hooked itself around the blade and jerked it forwards along with Rendell's arm. The knight widened his eyes as his guard was briefly exposed. Sanora launched her body forwards to slam her shoulder into the man's chest. Rendell grunted from the impact as Sanora unhooked her spear and swung the butt of the weapon towards the man's jaw. Raising his left arm, Rendell blocked the attack with his armored bracers before shoving Sanora away from him. The lancer grunted as she stumbled backwards. Rendell advanced, swinging his sword high before quick-stepping backwards to avoid another arrow of light striking against his head. His eyes briefly flickered over to see the two goddesses aiming towards him. The man pursed his lips before returning his attention to the lancer. Sanora jumped backwards, skating to a halt a good distance away from the saber and crouching her body low like an animal. Her left hand placed flat against the deck of the ship as she very clearly prepared herself to rush forwards. Tensing himself, Rendell pulled his straight sword back until it was parallel to his body with the tip pointed towards the lancer. Wood splintered and cracked as Sanora launched herself forwards with a boom, instantly moving to close the distance between the two of them whilst thrusting her lance forwards, aimed at running him through the gut. Hunching his body right, Rendell raised his left arm just as the tip of the spear passed by the top of his bracer. The knight parried the blow upwards whilst thrusting his sword towards the collar area of the armor. Sanora headbutted the sword instead, causing Rendell to widen his eyes in surprise as she made no effort to slow down and instead collided with him still moving at full speed. The force of the impact swept Rendell off his feet as the two of them slammed into the deck of the ship in a flurry of limbs. He kicked out, slamming his knee into the lancer's side and throwing her off him. Grunting as she collided with the deck, Sanora instantly rolled to the side just as the tip of Rendell's sword buried itself into the deck of the ship in a stabbing motion. Using the sword as leverage, Rendell made to stand up before being struck in the side by several pink arrows of light, hissing at the damage. His eyes snapped back to the lancer just in time for the woman to land a roundhouse kick against his chin, jerking his head to the side and slamming it into the railings of the ship before he recoiled from the wood, blinking repeatedly to focus himself again. Ha! Spinning her spear in her hands, Sanora struck him in the nose with the butt of the weapon, causing him to clasp his face around it and step backwards. While being undead did grant him a greater degree of pain resilience, it still didn't make him immune to pain. Being struck in the nose with a metal spear had a way of bringing out a painted reaction from him. His focus locked itself onto the lancer as she twirled the spear in her hand and thrust it forwards. His hands came away from his nose and latched around the spear, turning his body so that it grazed past him as he span around and slammed his elbow into the side of Sanora's head. The woman released a grunt of pain as the blow loosened her grip around the spear. Rendell yanked the weapon free from her grip and tossed it further down the length of the ship before he span back around and slammed his fist into the helmet's chin in a brutal uppercut which dented the metal inwards slightly and launched the woman off her feet and onto her back. His instincts screamed from behind him. Ducking low, he felt something pass through the air just above his head, followed by the signature sweeping sound of metal moving at incredible speed reaching his ears. Soon looking up to see the bladed section of Astario's halberd pass where his head had been a few seconds earlier. Rendell threw his body forwards into a roll, clasping the hilt of his sword still buried in the deck of the ship and spinning around to face the Minotaur just as they took another blast of dark magic to the back from the angel. With a heavy beat of its wings, the angel flew out of range of Astario's returned swipe and into the air. Raising the flat of their palm towards the berserker, the angel's hand glowed before a burst of light shot forth from the limb and formed a spear of dark light. Astario's raised his halberds in a blocking manner as the spell collided with his guard, hissing from the explosion in his face before lowering them and tensing his body, preparing to jump. Rendell rushed forwards, sliding past the back of Astario's left leg and reaching out with his sword, slashing across the berserker's hamstrings and dropping them to the ground with a pained cry and a heavy thud. Spinning back to his feet, Rendell thrust the sword towards the berserker's head to finish it off. He got punched in the face by Havel for his troubles. The impact sent him cartwheeling through the air with a numbness in his face. Havel grunted as he watched the man fly before raising his shield to block the beam of light fired from the angel. The attack slammed into his shield before being redirected towards the deck of the ship, carving a burning line through the wood before being pointed upwards. Lowering his shield, Havel snarled at the first angel while the second pointed its hand towards him before sweeping its right wing down as a shield. Artemis' arrow of light struck the angel with enough force to stagger it in the air, the left wing furiously beating faster as it attempted to stabilize itself before sweeping its hand out in front of it, generating a large black gate which consumed the next barrage of arrows launched towards him. Sammy snapped his fingers, a gate opened up above Artemis, Ritska and Urieli. The trio looked up to see the arrows which Mikey had caught suddenly rain down upon them and the golden hind. Ritska let out a panicked shout as he threw himself out of the way of the barrage. Senpai! Mash heard the panicked cry and the explosive sound of arrows striking against wood. However, her attempt to intervene was swiftly blocked off when the assassin slammed his shuttle into her shield. Mash leaned backwards as the curved blade hooked around her shield and stopped just shy of her throat. Ha! Shouting, Mash thrust the shield forwards and shook the assassin's blade around her shield free before swinging her shield upwards in an attempt to catch him in the chin. The man leaned away from the attack as Mash pulled the shield back and thrust it forwards like a battering ram. The assassin released a heavy cough as the impact sent him reeling backwards before righting himself. "That's quite the violent attitude you have there, young lady," the assassin mused with a cocky tone. Dear me. You must beware of how your appearance might affect First Impra." He was cut off as Mash swung at his head, slamming her shield into the deck of the ship before using it as an anchor to swing her body around and strike his head with an axe kick. The assassin hissed as his head snapped to the side before he reversed his blade and swung upwards towards her leg. Mash's eyes widened as she thrust her second leg forwards as well, catching the assassin in the chest with a drop kick. A pained cough erupted from the man's throat as her heeled boot slammed into his gut and caused him to stumble away from her. Mash grunted as she impacted the deck of the ship before scrambling to her feet to try and assume her combat stance. Grasping the handle of her shield, she turned around and thrust the flat of the tower shield towards the assassin. The man raised his twin shuttles as a guard, the weapons taking the brunt of the attack and pushing him backwards a few steps before he stopped, lowering the weapons and scanning Mash up and down before he gave a half shrug. "I suppose I should have expected this level of violence. Still, you really ought to be much more serene." A dark chuckle bubbled from the man's throat as magical energy slowly began to intensify around him. Mash widened her eyes at the release of his noble phantasm, because it could only have been that, and raised her shield in preparation to block it. "Perhaps living like a firekeeper will pacify you." The assassin's body glowed a subtle red as wisps of light danced around him. "Tend to the flames a little longer, maiden." The assassin rushed forwards. Mash tensed herself in preparation, jumping backwards as he moved to close the distance. Firekeeper's fate. The wisps of red smoke rushed away from him and towards the shielder, immediately making their way towards her face. The second they made contact with her eyes, she screamed. Oscar stumbled backwards as the red cutlass slammed into his shield once again, the pain in his arm and leg still flaring as he struggled to defend himself properly. It wasn't difficult to see that without the presence of Archer, he likely would have been dead already. Mary jumped away from the knight when he made for a slash. The smaller girl frequently darted her attention over to Anne, still fighting David, before looking back to the two in front of her. She wasn't exactly a master at sword combat, but she was better at it than Anne, who really needed her support right now. Archer rushed in again, swinging his twin swords towards the rider and forcing her onto the back foot almost immediately. The height and skill advantage he had was almost laughable as the girl struggled to deal with his repeated blows. Oscar stumbled to pursue before a scream of genuine pain reached his ears. His head snapped around to the source just in time to see Mash drop her shield and begin to claw at her face, all the while screaming loud enough to echo out over the sounds of combat, just as the bronze-armored man moved in and delivered a swift kick to her gut and forcing her onto her back. He'd seen enough. The pain in his leg burned, but that didn't matter to him. Forcing as much power into his body as possible, he charged forwards. Raising his shield up, he cleared the distance of the ship just as the man raised his curved sword to finish her off. Lautrec heard the rushing footprints a second before he felt the full weight of the Astoran knight slam into his side with enough force for the both of them to keel over into a mess of limbs. Oscar was quick to mount the assassin with his sword raised high in preparation to descend. Lautrec swung his left shuttle upwards, slicing into Oscar's side and causing a pained cry to erupt from the man as he gripped his shoulder with his right hand and roughly threw him off. Immediately noticing the heavy gash in his knee, pulling himself up slightly, he raised his right fist and hurled it downwards as hard as he could onto the injury. The armored gauntlet slammed into the kneecap with a sickening crunch, soon followed by a popping sound as the leg broke. Oscar cried out in pain as Lautrec's left hand lashed out and tightly wrapped against the handle of his weapon before he ripped the shuttle still embedded in Oscar's side out, flipping his body over onto his right side as he did so. Oscar's grip on his straight sword faltered long enough for Lautrec to kick the sword out of his hands and further up the ship before raising his boot and stamping it onto the man's wounded arm. How many times will these pitiful lambs rush to slaughter? Lautrec shook his head derisively, giving Oscar a tired shake of the head. Well, twirling the shuttle in his left hand, he raised it above his head. Let's get it over with. He swung the blade downwards. The saber jerked his body up and to the side as the weapon descended. Instead of the shuttle slicing off his head, Oscar ensured it buried itself deep into his right shoulder and through into his ribs. Lautrec seemingly recoiled in surprise at the sudden move before he moved to rip the blade clean. Oscar's wounded arm lashed out and clamped down around his wrist, stopping the movement in its tracks. Oscar's roar was primal, throwing himself forwards and onto his feet and completely ignoring the shattered bones in his leg. He didn't care for that right now. All that truly mattered was defeating the opponent in front of him. If it's just this much, he screamed in his mind whilst continuing to roar, swinging his shield in his arm upwards across his body and into Lautrec's elbow. Metal bent and bones broke as the arm shattered, bending inwards with the strike and causing Lautrec's grip on the shuttle to falter. Oscar's grip remained as tight as ever as he held the assassin in place, pulling his shield back and slamming the ridge into the faceplate of the helm with the full weight of his body behind the blow. The two of them went down with Lautrec still hissing in pain and cradling his broken arm while Oscar fell flat onto his face. Whatever strength had possessed him departed his body and left only agonizing pain from the blade still buried in him. The deck of the ship acted like a hammer and drove the weapon deeper into his body. Spitting out blood through the visor, Oscar heaved as he struggled to move. Lautrec rolled himself over, still gritting his teeth at his broken arm before he spied his spare shuttle lying on the ground not far from him. He hobbled towards it, reaching out and clasping the handle of the blade. A heeled boot slammed into the flat of the blade, holding it in place as a shadow loomed over him. Lautrec stilled, slowly craning his neck up towards the figure. Mash glared down at him, her eyes still puffy and red from the effect of the noble phantasm, breathing heavily even as tears streamed down her cheeks. Piss! Mash swung the shield forwards with all her weight behind it. The edge of the metal crashed into Lautrec's chin with a heavy thud and sent the knight flipping through the air and over the railings of the ship, soon followed by a heavy splash into the water. Mash made to turn back to Oscar only for a flash of light to appear in front of her and for the assassin to manifest back in front of her, the man still soaking wet from his brief fall into the ocean. The unfortunate fact of the matter was that he was still recovering from the shield uppercut, which left him vulnerable enough for Mash to smash the shield into the top of his head, slamming him face first into the deck of the ship with enough force to shatter the wooden floorboards and bury his head and neck into the ship. Her head snapped back to Oscar, her puffy eyes instantly widened in alarm at the state the knight was in, sputtering and coughing blood with the shuttle still buried in his body. She'd been barely able to hear the clash between him and Lautrec while she was recovering from the noble phantasm, something which still stung and made seeing rather difficult, but until she got onto her feet she hadn't known how bad it had been. She stepped towards the knight with her hand extended only for a strained grunt to reach her ears. The shielder snapped her head towards the edge of the ship just in time to see Asterios get struck in the back by a ball of fire shot forth by one of the angels. Her eyes darted between Oscar and Asterios. Forget, Oscar croaked, spitting out another glob of blood onto the deck of the ship as he raised a trembling hand. Help them, he pointed it towards the others before it fell back onto the deck of the ship, the knight's breathing stuttering. Mash. Her heart lightened as she heard Ritska's voice ring in her head. Get Oscar back onto the Golden Hind and then go help Asterios. The shielder nodded her head with a pleased smile as she grabbed Oscar as gently as she could and lifted him into a bridal carry before rushing over to the boarding ramp. Lautrec grunted as he ripped his head free of the deck of the ship, blinking rapidly behind his helmet as the ringing continued to scream in his ears. His eyes locked onto the retreating form of Mash with Oscar in her arms. The assassin heaved, using his right arm to push himself up. A flash of light in the distance was the only warning he received before one of Artemis' arrows punched its way through his gut and out of his back, tearing through his damaged armor and forcing him down. The man coughed out blood from the hole now running through his gut, lying flat on his back staring at the sky. F Fina, he wheezed out, stretching his hand upwards towards the sky. I failed once again. He sputtered out another bloodied cough as his form began to flicker away into golden motes of light. The arm went limp and thumped against the deck of the ship. I'm sure next time, I'll give you the perf, ECT, his form flickered away. The goddess gave the assassin a disdainful look before flashing Mash a wide smile and waving her over. Sometimes it's scary how easily you can just switch tones like that. Orion commented, staring up at the goddess. I mean, it's a little bit of a turn on but still scary. Ah, really? Should I do it more often? Artemis placed a dainty finger on her chin and tilted her head in puzzlement. If Orion had the ability to, he would have blanched at Artemis acting more tonally flippant than she already did. No. He sputtered out, no need for that. Really? Yes. Now get back to shooting arrows. Okay. Mash gently lay the knight down against the mast, the shuttle in his body already fading into golden motes of light as it followed its master in death. Her eyes flashed over to Ritska as he rushed towards her, ducking low to avoid any wayward gunshots as he crouched by Oscar's side. The master grimaced. Oh okay, this is pretty bad. A pained wheeze was Oscar's response. Why, you have never seen undead injuries before. A coughing fit cut him off as more blood poured free of the wound, flakes of blood splattering against Ritska's cheek and causing the master to freeze. My apologies, Oscar heaved, that was unsightly. Forget that. Ritska blurted out in shock. Form a contract with me. What? Senpai. I can't heal you unless we're contracted. Ritska explained. He nodded over to Mash. Go help Asterios, try and cover him from the angel and give him an opportunity. Yes, Senpai. Mash gave a single determined nod, manifesting her shield and spinning around before rushing back onto the Queen Anne's Revenge. Just form a contract with me. Ritska urged him, holding out his hand. I can heal you so that you will at least not fade away, you're hardly right. Oscar stared at him in silence. I'm not worth, he coughed again, not worth it. Hell you are. Ritska growled. I don't care where you're from or whatever the heck your legend is, you're part of Drake's crew and you're a part of the team. There's no way I'm letting you die here if I can do something about it. The helmet stared down at the extended hand before looking back at Ritska. You shouldn't. I consider myself the authority on what I shouldn't do, right now. He paused for a few moments. All right, the director might disagree, but this isn't something I shouldn't do. This is something I am absolutely going to do, and so help me if you try and let yourself die without even trying, I will summon you back. Why? The man panted out. I'm not worth. I'll decide what you're worth. Ritska's eyes bored into him. And right now, you're worth something. Ha! Oscar coughed out a pained laugh. Is this what faith is? He slumped. Very well. He reached out his left hand towards Ritska's. If you have faith. Ritska cracked a smirk at him before he steeled his expression. I tell thee, thou shalt serve under me. Half-Light stumbled backwards as Ash slammed Galvatine into his blade, the force behind the strike causing him to buckle. The man rolled away and lashed out with another barrage of light spears towards Boudica as she rushed towards him. The rider slowed, raising her shield to block the spears aimed at her face, before thrusting her sword forwards. A beam of golden light shot forth from the blade. Half-Light widened his eyes as the beam slammed into his chest and caused him to skate backwards across the deck as Ash pursued him, raising his sword high to cleave through the archer. Half-Light steadied his breathing, changing his position and sheathing his sword while focusing on Ash. His expression steeled as Galvatine closed in on him. Magical energy built up around him rapidly, long enough for Boudica to notice something was wrong. Before she could attempt to warn Ash, Half-Light lunged forwards. The sword was ripped free of its scabbard. Hokurobito. Glowing a brilliant purple as Halflight launched 4 attacks upon the unkindled. The first slash struck Ash just below his right wrist, slicing it open and causing his grip on his greatsword to falter. The second slash sliced along his inner thigh, he stumbled on the wounded leg. The third slash cut upwards across his kidneys on his right side. The fourth slash sliced down across his shoulder from the left side, down to his hips. Ash stumbled away from the archer, his wounds bleeding as he hissed in pain. The greatsword fell from his hand and thudded against the floor. Halflight stepped backwards, raising his sword high as he noticed Boudica rushing towards him. The air behind him shimmered at the same time he thrust his left hand forwards, a trail of lightning sparked along the ground. Boudica sidestepped the barrage of spears just as the divine spears shot out from the deck of the ship, blocking off her access to Ash. Turning on the unkindled, he ducked low as Ash hurled a fireball at his head. The black flames slammed into the wall of spears behind the archer as he rushed forwards. Ash's left hand clasped around the aquamarine dagger at his belt, ripping it free and thrusting it towards Halflight's throat. The archer raised his sword, blocking the dagger by its hilt just shy of his jugular. The archer kicked against the wound on Ash's thigh, causing the saber to fall onto one knee as the archer loomed over him. Pushing the katana downwards and closer to Ash's neck, Halflight gave a victorious smirk. Now, unkindled. I shall claim Jew. He was cut off, his eyes bulging as his next sentence came out as a gargle of bloodied words. Ash stared blankly at him. Halflight's eyes trailed down to the dagger, staring at it. And the crystalline blade which had erupted from the dagger, more than doubling its length and running straight through his throat. Halflight's grip on his katana went slack, the blade fell down with a thud as he clasped at his bleeding throat. Ash slashed the blade across, spraying blood across the deck as the archer fell into the puddle, still clasping at his wound in a futile effort. Ash grunted as he pushed him to his feet. The aquamarine dagger's extended blade fell back into its dagger form as he slid it into its sheath. You should have just killed me when you had the chance, was the only advice Ash offered him, limping over to Galvatine and picking it up from the deck with his left hand and turning back to Halflight, raising the sword above his head in an executioner style. The blade descended without giving the man an opportunity to do much else, cleaving through his neck and causing the spear wall to vanish. Boudica rushed through and paused as she saw Ash pull the sword free of the deck and turn to her. The rider gave a sigh of relief. Thought he got you with his noble phantasm. She spoke. Ash gave a pained nod and looked down at his bleeding wounds, falling back down onto the deck of the ship. He did. It might take some time to heal these. He muttered out, grunting as he tried to prop himself up with his greatsword. Aid the others, I will be fine. All right, Boudica muttered in a somewhat unsure tone before leveling a finger at Ash and with a strict expression, but I shall hold you to this, Master will be most upset if you die. Without waiting for a rebuttal, she rushed off to the other fights occurring throughout the deck. Ash remained silent as she ran past him, still staring at the dissipating body of Halflight. Archer would never be one to underestimate an opponent, that would be foolish and often end up with someone dead. But as it stood, he would admit that he likely outclassed this rider in physical combat and in terms of skill. Parrying away the red cutlass, the young girl shot away from him as he sliced through the air at her head, cutting away a few wisps of her hair as he did so before he shot off after her. Without the support of the other servant, there wasn't much she could do against him. Mary knew that as well. It was why she was desperately trying to get back to Anne. Which was much easier said than done. Using her small stature and superior speed she had been able to avoid the fatal blows thus far. However, it didn't matter much when it came to this servant, who seemed to have already seen through her fighting style and come up with countermeasures. Every time she went for his ankle or joint he was already waiting for her and she didn't have Anne's support to break the stalemate. It had gotten easier when the other knight had run off but it had been marginal. Swinging upwards, her cutlass slammed into the black sword held in the servant's left hand. Steel-gray eyes stared down at her as the servant jerked the sword to the side and swung his right blade towards her head. Kicking off the ground, she deftly avoided being slashed across the face, the servant swiftly following after her and unleashing a barrage of thrusts and jabs designed to break away at her guard. Gritting her teeth, Mary continued to pedal backwards as she tried to avoid the archer. A beam of golden light struck the ground next to her ankle. The small explosion caused her to lose her footing. Eyes wide in alarm, she was unable to do much when Archer slammed his boot into her cheek and sent her flying across the deck head first into the railings of the ship. Archer glanced over his shoulder just in time to see Boudica rushing towards him, her sword's glow dying down as she sent him a brief nod before continuing her charge against Mary. The girl already pulling herself up and seeing the already pitiful odds stacked against her further. A familiar grunt of pain had her shoot a glance over her shoulder just in time to see David slam the top of his staff against Anne's chin. The girl recoiled backwards as the archer advanced forwards, twirling the staff and slapping the rifle off to the side as it fired and thrusting his weapon down into her knee, causing her to step backwards as he continued onwards. Mary made to help before a stab from Boudica had her roll aside in order to avoid. Goo! A pained cry erupted from her throat as something slammed into her side. Looking down, she stared in disbelief at the crossbow bolt in her ribs before she looked past the two servants charging her as time seemed to slow. Ash lowered his left hand with the large crossbow in his grasp, cringing in discomfort at having to fire with his left hand. If he was being honest, he was aiming at her knees. Mary released a huff of annoyance as she watched Archer's sword descend towards her without a trace of hesitation in him. As expected, she thought to herself as she felt the kiss of steel against her neck, I really shouldn't split from Anne. Shame. I really wanted to fight Drac. Archer's sword cleaved through her body, separating her head from her shoulders. Anne gasped as she felt her strength cut itself off. Her eyes snapped away from David briefly and towards the dissipating remains of Mary, the woman's face scrunched up before it fell in resignation. David paused in his advance, following her sight and then looking back to her. I see. I suppose that explains it, two servants with one spirit core. One of you goes and the other follows. Anne offered a half shrug as her answer, well, I suppose it was bound to happen. Me and Mary aren't that good as solo acts anyway. Her expression steeled as she turned towards David, spinning her rifle and leveling it towards him as he rushed towards her. The archer closed the distance, ducking low and hissing as a gunshot went off next to his ears. Cringing at the sound, he still didn't stop as he slammed into the rider with a shoulder barge and knocked her over. Rising up to try and smack David with the stock of her rifle, she barely caught a flash of light before she was struck with half a dozen glowing purple lights. The rider recoiled as injuries marked her body from the impacts, wincing in pain which only worsened when David struck her in the side with a kick. Reeling from the blow, Anne raised her rifle towards the direction the shots had come from. Euryale saw her and widened her eyes before a cold expression came to her face. Anne saw the expression shift and then noticed Artemis aiming towards her as well, the arrow of light already shining brightly as the goddess loosened it towards her. Oh. Anne spoke in a simple tone before the light impacted her right side, instantly shredding through her body and sending her reeling with a pained look on her face as she slammed into the ground. Coughing out once she leaned back against the deck of the ship with a tired expression, despite the injuries she sustained. We really aren't cut out for these fights, Mary. Ah, that's right, she went first, didn't she? A pained wheeze escaped her throat as she started to fade away into motes of light. Closing her eyes, she leaned back and allowed herself to dissipate with as peaceful an expression as she could manage. David watched her depart with a cool look, closing his eyes and offering a silent prayer before he turned his attention further up the ship towards Drake and Blackbeard. Then promptly cringed at the sight of the two. Drake staggered backwards, her nose crooked and leaking blood like a faucet despite the shark-like grin on her face as she took a single step towards Blackbeard. Teach matched her ferocity blow for blow as the two had long since foregone any measure of composure and just resorted to wailing on each other like barbarians. Blackbeard snorted blood out of his nose as he stumbled back from Drake, releasing a war cry and swinging his clawed hand towards her head. Drake watched the arm descend as she ducked low, the claw still impaling her hat and swiping it off her head. The woman gawked at it before giving Blackbeard a venomous glare. That was my favorite hat, you fucker. She launched herself forwards and slammed her palm into Teach's nose. The pirate recoiled from the blow at the crack before his eyes locked onto Drake. Swinging his body forwards, he slammed his forehead into Drake with all the force of a sledgehammer and caused the woman to recoil back from him, stumbling as she tried to reclaim her footing as Teach charged again, throwing the full weight of his body behind his left hand and slamming his fist into her gut with enough force to briefly knock her into the air. Drake heaved out the air in her lungs in response, her eyes cracking up towards Teach and narrowing as space ripped open behind her. Teach widened his eyes and jumped back, swinging his arms upwards and raising the appearance of spirits as cannons formed over Drake's shoulders pointed at him. Beams of light fired forth from the weapons as Teach skipped backwards, the beams shredding through his spirit defense and slamming into his shoulder. Blackbeard hissed in pain from the burn before a smile spread across his face. "Not bad, you hag," he complimented with a gruff shout, still grinning from ear to ear as he swung his hand forwards. "Not bad at all. Very cool." More humanoid spirits pulled themselves from his ship and charged towards the captain. "Keep talking, asshole," Drake shouted back as she ripped her own cutlass from its scabbard and pulled her flintlock from her opposite side. "I'll have that head of yours as a trophy." "I give the threat a 6 out of 10. Teach laughed, sounds a little cliché but points for the badass look. Drake scoffed and charged forwards, swinging the cutlass in her right hand whilst firing off the flintlock in her left hand. Ducking low, she split one of the spirits in half and without a moment of hesitation she swung her left arm to level with the head of another spirit, instantly pulling the trigger and destroying its head before she continued her brutal charge towards Blackbeard. The pirate captain blinked as inch by bloody inch, Drake forced her way closer and closer to him. Hacking and slashing her way through the ghostly apparitions. Spinning on her heel, Drake sent a wide swing and cleaved through a dozen spirits at once as the cannons above her shoulder continued to fire indiscriminately in front of her. Wood shattered and was sent flying as the deck exploded. Teach covered his eyes and stepped backwards to avoid being consumed in the explosion. Covering his eyes, he squinted at the heat before they widened. Smoke parted as the form of Drake leapt through the clouds, her expression set in a shark-like grin as she flew through the air towards Blackbeard. Raising her sword high, she swung down towards Teach. "Ha!" Teach laughed as he swung his claw upwards, the sword and claw locked against each other in a show of strength with both of the pirates straining against each other. Releasing a cry of effort, Teach threw Drake backwards with a wide swing of his claw. Drake raised her left hand as she was thrown backwards, leveling her flintlock at Blackbeard and pulling the trigger. The bullet slammed into Blackbeard's side and out the back of his body, causing him to cough up blood and lurch backwards with the impact. Her boots slammed into the deck of the ship, digging in as she skated backwards across the deck and scraping away at the wooden paneling before coming to a halt, her head snapped up with her smile still remaining on her face. Blackbeard clasped his bullet wound on his right side with his hand, pulling away his fingers to stare at the sticky red liquid clinging to them before chuckling. As expected of Francis Drake though. "Still, you'll have to do a lot better than that if you wanna beat the great Edward Teach." He slammed his left foot into the ground and hunched himself forwards in a tackling position. Kicking off the ground, he charged forwards towards Drake. The woman flipped her pistol around in her grip and swung the handle of the flintlock towards Teach's head like a hammer. The pirate ducked just underneath the pistol and slammed into Drake's waist, wrapping his arms around her and hoisting her up into the air. Drake let out a surprised squawk as Blackbeard leaned forwards and rushed down towards the ground, slamming her back against the deck of the ship with enough force to splinter the wood and bend it inwards. Coughing heavily, she looked up just in time to see Teach cock his left hand back in preparation for a punch. She did the only thing she could think of. She kicked upwards, between his legs, as hard as she could. Her knee slammed into Blackbeard's own treasure with a heavy thud. The pirate's eyes bulged nearly out of his skull in an almost comical fashion as his expression scrunched up like a lemon. Blackbeard fell over and released a reverberating groan of pain as he clasped at his injuries and occasionally released a deep hiss of pain. Unbeknownst to the pair of them, everyone who had managed to catch a glimpse of the fight, more so the men, also felt a deep phantom pain strike them, cringing at the reaction of the pirate. "Shiver me timbers," Blackbeard whimpered, still breathing heavily. "That's a dick move." Drake grunted as she pulled herself out of her small indentation, giving Blackbeard a flat look as she clambered to her feet. "Man up, not like there's much there to damage." "I don't know if that hurts more or less than getting kicked there." Blackbeard wondered aloud in a slightly higher pitched voice than usual. "Yeah well, maybe next time you won't call me a haw." "Drake, look out, haw." Drake turned just in time towards the direction of Ritzka's shout to see Rendell flying towards her. The king's armored boot struck her gut with a heavy crunch. Drake felt her body recoil violently before she flew through the air and smashed into the edge of the ship with enough force to cough out blood. Heaving, the woman desperately attempted to get oxygen back into her lungs as her eyes remained fixed on Rendell, the knight staring blankly at her before he looked down towards Blackbeard. The pirate looked up at Rendell with a scowl. "Hey. I was gonna win he cut himself off, flattening his features as he stared longer at Rendell's blank expression. "Ah, so that's how it is. For what it is worth. This also disgusts me." Rendell offered his way of an apology. The confusion lasted for barely a moment before Rendell thrust his straight sword through Blackbeard's heart. The rider's breath caught in his throat before the saber ripped the blade free and leaned down to clasp the glowing jewel around his chest, pulling it free. The knight's expression shifted to a slightly troubled one as his eyes flickered away from the jewel in his hands to Teach, the pirate lying on his back and coughing heavily. The conflict seemed to die down in the wake of what occurred. "You," Drake's expression warped into an ugly sneer, "how long were you waiting to do that?" "Not long," Rendell answered with a bland tone of voice. "In truth, I had hoped he would perish in combat, but that outcome would lead to the Grail being lost, which is not something I would allow." "You betrayed your master just for the Grail." "No, I was never summoned by Edward to begin with." Rendell shrugged, looking away from Drake and towards the litany of servants now staring at him, all of whom were assuming offensive positions. "But even so, I did not want to kill him in such a way, but that is simply the way conflict plays out. We do not always get the end we so desire." Drake pulled herself up, grabbing her flintlock and pointing it towards the knight's back. "It won't matter much, pal, you'll still die here." "Will I?" Rendell wondered aloud before he sighed. "Perhaps, but that is not to say I do not have a trump card up my sleeve." He looked across the deck of the ship and softened his features. "Having perished this way, it is not a fate I would wish upon another, but I would like you to know I am truly sorry for what is about to occur to you." The servants wasted no further effort, charging towards him en masse as Rendell slammed his sword into the deck of the ship and spread his arms wide. "The king has led his people to ruin, the knights are lost and salvation remains beyond our reach." The air around him began to glow before he spoke a final time. "Behold my invasion of failure." Lost knights. Air around him exploded outwards, blanketing the entire ship in a single instant. Question mark. Blinked twice, rubbing his head as the headache set in. What was he doing again? Looking around he soon found himself surprised to see he was standing upon what was he standing on? Where was he? He jolted, spinning around to see a boy. Was that a boy? No, that was wrong. A girl. That's what they were. They were a girl. She was being grabbed by a person. A person with metal attached to them. They were a knight. They were a knight. That was weird. Why was a knight here? He didn't think that was right, but he couldn't remember much at the moment. He grimaced as the headache got worse, moving his hand up to cradle his head. The sound of struggling had him blink as he stared at the knight holding the small purple-haired girl. She looked about as confused as he felt, although the knight took great care in holding her as he walked towards him. Blinked as the knight approached him. He felt like he should say something, but instead all he could give was a troubled expression. "Excuse me, young man." The knight spoke in a cordial tone. He blinked once and stepped aside. "My thanks. I suppose I should kill you." He blanched at the sudden declaration. "But I have already dirtied myself enough for the moment." The knight's expression shifted into a troubled frown. "Besides, I believe you might have problems of your own shortly." They moved past him with a single nod and towards. Wait, was he on a ship? Why was he on a ship in the first place? He was there for kid. Hey, kid. He blinked, looking down at something punching his leg. What the hell? He recoiled away from the talking bear. Those things weren't supposed to talk. Except Orion, but he was. Wait, oh, Orion. He paused, staring at the bear. That's your name, right? Yes. Orion let out a sigh of relief. That's my name. Something's wacky here. Everyone got affected by that guy's noble Fanta. Ah, you got hit too, didn't you? Huh. He blinked once at the bear. Noble Fanta. What? Huh. Oh great. Orion sighed. Listen, kid, you've got to. A loud bang echoed out across the ship, followed by a pained cry. He and Orion snapped their heads in the direction of the shout only to see the knight stumble slightly. A hole punched through the back of his armor near his shoulder. The man's head snapped around in surprise. He and Orion followed the knight's point of view to see another man, bleeding from his mouth with a gun raised towards the knight, the barrel still smoking from having fire. I don't know much, but as a pirate I ain't gonna let someone steal treasure from me without a fight. Tenacious until the very end. The knight huffed in amusement. That's fitting for you. Senpai. He blinked at the feminine cry, turning around to see Mash. Mash. Her name was Mash. Mash. Ritska. His name was Ritska, exclaimed before realization set in and he snapped his head towards the knight. Mash. He has Euryale. Rendell blinked before tilting his head. I would have thought you'd have forgotten longer, must be because of the shield-bearing girl. No matter. He nodded to something to their left, you have more pressing matters. Huh. Ritska blinked, turning to his side only to see Oscar looming over him with his sword raised high, poised to cut him down. Mash roughly gripped the back of his collar and pulled him backwards, raising her shield and blocking the first strike with ease. Oscar-san. What are you doing? Ha! A guttural snarl was her only reply as Oscar pulled back his shield and slammed it into the center of Mash's defense like a battering ram. The girl held her ground even then, which only seemed to prompt Oscar to become more animalistic in his attacks towards her, virtually throwing himself at the shielder with slashes and punches like an enraged beast, all the while growling as if he were one. Rendell turned away, moving towards the edge of the ship and jumping overboard. A lifeboat seemingly manifested beneath him. He sat Euryale down gently and began to row away from them at high speeds. Rendell is escaping with Euryale and the Grail. Romani cried over the communicator. Wait. Forget that. Fujimaru-kun is in danger first. Mash, what's happening? I don't know. Mash grunted as she parried Oscar's sword away. Coiling her shield back, she thrust it forwards like a spear and slammed the butt of the weapon into Oscar's chest, staggering him backwards from them. Perhaps it is still the effect of the noble phantasm and he's forgotten we're allies. She reasoned, although that didn't explain the noises. Try not to kill him. Ritska commanded. We need to hold him back until. He paused as an explosion went off behind him. He touched the back of his neck and caused him to stumble from the blast. He spun around to see the deck of the Queen Anne's Revenge currently on fire. The entire ship was burning from stem to stern without any hint of what had happened. Blackbeard fell backwards. His body didn't quite touch the deck of the ship, however, finding himself caught in someone's arms. He looked up to see the faceless hood of Sammy cradling him. A snort escaped his throat as he turned away. Would have been better if you were a pretty girl. Sammy didn't respond. Blackbeard sighed loudly. Well, it was a fun adventure, wasn't it? That's what matters, he grunted, forcing himself up. Still though, Sammy floated alongside him as he helped Teach to his feet. I'd rather not leave without at least doing something. Can't let just anyone steal away Euryale-chan, right? The hood stared back at him. You always do have a way with words. He spat out a mouthful of blood. But, he looked across the burning deck of his ship, the sounds of steel clashing against steel ringing in his ears. Well shit, Teach chuckled airily. Looks like a real bad time. Better sort his out first. He pushed himself out of Sammy's grip and towards the burning ship. Ain't no one burning my ship down while I'm still alive, that's for sure. Sanora gasped as the burning first slammed against her helmet. The woman staggered with the punch only for the follow-through backhand to send her cartwheeling through the air, over the top of Archer and Boudica as they stepped away from the burning river of fire. The scrapping of steel was soon followed by the dark silhouette of Ash emerging from the inferno, his eyes crazed as they darted between the two of them. Scraping the sword up, Ash hoisted Galvatine onto his shoulder and snarled at the pair of them. The sword ignited with demon fire. The flames even started to burn away at his armor and cloth without him paying much attention, as his left hand crackled with black fire. Calm down. Boudica ordered him as best she could, stepping away from the raging inferno and bringing the saber's eyes onto her. What's gotten into you? He's gone hollow. Sanora growled from behind them, pushing herself back to her feet. We'll have to kill him before we all die. His eyes fell upon her, coiling his left arm back in a throwing position. The three servants in front of him widened their eyes in alarm as he hurled his first forwards, unleashing a giant ball of black fire towards the trio. Scatter! Archer cried out as he hurled himself to one side. Boudica dived in the opposite direction and rolled across the ground. Sanora skipped backwards as the ball of fire collided with the deck of the ship in front of her and exploded in a wave of black flames. The girl released a cry as she was forced back through the wall of flames. Ash threw his head backwards, releasing a primal roar before he charged towards the nearest target. Boudica looked up and widened her eyes as she saw Ash rush towards her, dragging his burning sword along the ground and leaving behind a trail of fire in the wood, and raised his sword in a chopping motion, swinging it down with as much force as he could muster. Boudica raised her shield to block the attack. Galvatine slammed into her with enough force to knock her onto her back, the impact sending her reeling and causing her arm to jolt with pain. The flames seemed to transfer onto the shield and began to burn away at her skin. The rider hissed in pain, dismissing her shield and turning her attention to Ash as he swung his sword in a sweeping motion towards her. Raising her own sword in a blocking pose, she was knocked back as he slammed through her guard, throwing his left hand towards her face with his pal still burning with black flames. Archer's boot slammed against the side of his head, his arm diverted off course and exploded next to her head. The heat had her cringe and lean away from the explosion, falling back into a roll as Ash lashed out towards Archer in retaliation. The servant hopped backwards to avoid the return slash. Ash's sword positively exploded with flames, pulling his right arm back and sweeping it forwards to unleash a torrent of the chaos fire upon the deck of the ship once again. He stared at the raging inferno in front of him before heavy thuds caught his attention. His head snapped in the direction of the sound, watching as a large silhouette appeared and got closer and closer. His eyes narrowed as he prepared himself. Havel exploded forth from the wall of fire, his armor smoking from the chaos flames with his shield raised and club primed for a striking attack. Ash snarled and jumped backwards as Havel slammed the club into the deck of the ship with as much force as he could muster. The entire ship teetered to the starboard side in response to the crack. Burning debris was sent flying from the point of impact with the shockwave from the attack instantly snuffing out the surrounding flames. Landing backwards, Ash locked his eyes onto Havel, raising his left hand and then slamming it into his chest. A red aura exploded forth from his body, clinging to his entire being like a blanket as his left hand moved away from his chest and clasped around the handle of his sword. Ash threw himself forwards, swinging his sword like a club towards Havel, who raised his shield to block the attack. Gritting his teeth as Ash slammed the sword into his defense with enough force to stagger him slightly, Ash's eyes locked onto another silhouette in the flames. His right hand came free of the handle as he twisted the blade so the flat edge rested against Havel's shield. He slammed his palm onto the blade and pushed, pivoting the two servants so the tip of the blade was pointed towards the silhouette. David and Sanora emerged from the blaze, only to see the tip of Ash's sword immediately glow white while pointed in their direction. David's eyes bulged before he threw himself to one side, down. He yelled as he did so. Sanora was slower on the realization, her view having been blocked by David, and only barely caught the warning before Ash's sword fired forth a beam of pure light. The projectile slammed into her chest and sent her flying back the way she came with a grunt of pain. Pulling his hand free, he twisted the blade into the edge and scraped it along Havel's shield while igniting it with fire. The chaos flames splashed across the shield and over the top onto Havel. The berserker growled as the cursed fire impacted against his armor. He pushed the shield forwards and into Ash, battering the unkindled away from him to get some distance. Ash rested his right hand onto the greatsword while pulling his left hand free, staring at the berserker and the more servants which soon began to emerge from the flames. He growled louder before his left hand burst to life with fire. The flames leaked down from his grip before they suddenly twisted and curved. Then solidified into the shape of a curved sword. AAAAARRRRRGGGGGHHHH. Ash threw himself into the middle of the servants like a frenzied beast, swinging both weapons with reckless abandon in a vortex of fire. The moment a servant would get closer to him, Ash would release another jet of flames to force them backwards as he continued his rampage. Asterios slammed the halberd into Ash's guard, blocked by Galvatine. Ash roared and pushed the weapon to the side before slashing out with Demon's Scar. The curved sword stabbed into Asterios' side and caused the Minotaur to release a cry of pain. The sword then melted back into Ash's palm which rested against the wound, only to explode in a ball of fire which sent the berserker reeling from them with scream, his side charred from the impact. Ash twirled away from the berserker, slashing in an arc downwards towards David. The archer skipped away from Ash's Galvatine struck the deck of the ship and then exploded. Ash used the force of the explosion to propel the blade back across the deck of the ship and into an attack against Archer. The servant stepped backwards as Galvatine shattered Kancho in a single swipe. The tanned servant widened his eyes as Ash manifested the burning sword once again and thrust it towards his chest. Raising Bakuya, Archer blocked the attack with the flat of the blade and used the power behind the attack to increase the distance between the two of them. Ash snarled, spinning around and blocking Sanora's spear at the cross-section, diverting it over his left shoulder and slashing at her leg with Demon's Scar. The lancer skipped back to avoid losing the limb, instead only suffering a slight slash across the top of the armor. Havel charged in, swinging his club down towards him as Ash dissipated Demon's Scar and raised Galvatine in a blocking motion, supporting the weapon with his palm resting on the flat of the blade. The club slammed into his guard with a heavy thud, the shockwave served only to fan the flames surrounding the ground. Ash caught sight of Boudica moving out of the corner of his eyes. Twisting his body, he forced Havel's club down onto her sword as she attempted a stab. Locking both weapons down, he then swung his left hand in a haymaker which caught the red-haired rider in the jaw. Boudica's head snapped to the side from the punch as she staggered away. Havel heaved and pulled his club upwards, swinging it and Ash's weapon into the air before pivoting his body and thrusting the ridge of his shield into Ash's gut. The unkindled folded forwards with the impact, soon sending him flying back with the blow and slamming into the railings of the ship with a crunch, shattering the wooden planks and sending more splashes of fire across the deck of the ship. The unkindled's eyes snapped up towards them. He made to rush back upwards before he blinked once, then twice, peering at the group as if he'd seen them for the first time. "Wait, what?" he muttered out to himself. "Where, what?" He then looked around the burning remains of the ship as the mast shattered, burning splinters sent flying as it keeled over the side of the ship and splashed into the water. "What happened?" he asked, looking more puzzled than anything else. The servants were still tense as he made to stand back up. David released a sigh of relief. "I'd say you're back." "You are back, yes." "Back." Ash blinked at him in confusion. "I was gone." Oscar recoiled away from the blow. The arrow of light slammed into his side and sent him to ground. The man scrambled to get back to his feet only for space in front of him to distort. Ritska and Mash widened their eyes in alarm as the familiar black gate manifested itself. Only to jolt when Blackbeard came flying out with a two-footed drop kick, slamming into Oscar and sending him cartwheeling backwards and onto the ground. "Yoo-hoo!" Blackbeard cheered, throwing his hand up. "He scores." Then span around, spitting out blood as he did so. "That was badass, right Mashu-chan?" "Senpai. Enemy servant." Mash shouted instead. "I'll eliminate him right now." Wait. Blackbeard waved his hands in front of him, spitting out more blood. "I'm being helpful here, you know." He gestured to the gate. Ritska and Mash followed his gestured only to blink as Sammy floated through the gate, Drake held in his arms. "Bridal carried by an angel." Drake flatly spoke as she caught sight of Ritska and Mash. "I'd say suspension of disbelief doesn't exist anymore. I'm a dead man with an angel as my crew member and trying to steal a goddess." Blackbeard shrugged. "I'd say suspension didn't exist to begin with," he panted out, then fell over. The second angel appeared from the gate and swiftly caught Blackbeard before he fell. Once again, Blackbeard snorted, "I wish you were a pretty girl." Ritska stared at Blackbeard with a weirded out expression before looking over to Drake as the angel gently set her down. "Why would you?" "Help you." Blackbeard coughed. "Ah. Not for you. Mainly for Urieli-chan. You'll go off and save her. Also, well," he snickered, "I think that this was a rather cool moment for me anyway." "You're crazy." Ritska blurted out, shaking his head in disbelief, "But, well, I suppose I should thank you." "Huh." Blackbeard coughed out blood. "You should also kill that Rendell guy." "Really? Getting stabbed after getting kicked in the balls? Talk about beating someone while they're down," he muttered, leaning back into Mikey's arms. "Sheesh. I hound on about that old hag, but really, she was human and she kicked my ass." Looking over towards Drake, he cracked her a smirk. "Not bad. That was cool to see." Yeah. Drake dismissively waved her hand as she stumbled to her feet, giving Blackbeard a tired smile. "Hurry up and die, you bastard. Take that head with you. Probably not worth much anyway." PFF'd. Blackbeard wheezed. "Yeah. See you in hell, Drake." "Yeah. See you there, Teach." She smirked at him, crossing her arms. "See you there." Blackbeard chuckled before he noticed Mikey and Sammy slowly begin to fade away as well, looking up and frowning. "What are you doing then? Don't want me to disappear on my own, do you?" The angels both remained silent. "Geez, you really are too serious," Blackbeard muttered, closing his eyes as his body faded away. "Really? Well, can't say it wasn't fun. It was, right?" The hoods nodded their heads. "Huh, that's all right then," Blackbeard spoke as he almost fully disappeared. "That's all right." Sammy and Mikey soon followed after him, their own forms vanishing into golden motes of light. The two remained silent as they followed Blackbeard at the very end. Ritska watched them in silence, pursing his lips. Confirming the disappearance of Blackbeard and Sammy, Mash reported, her own expression slightly perturbed before her eyes widened. Rendell has escaped with Urieli-san and the Grail. Not for long he ain't. Drake shouted out, limping over to the wheel of the ship, not if I have anything to say about it. That's my treasure he's stealing. Everyone, Ritska shouted through his mind, get back to the ship. We're following after Rendell and Urieli. Once he received his replies, he nodded to Mash to continue to watch over Oscar. The man groaned as he pushed himself up. Wah, what happened? He mumbled to himself, then clasped his body. Oh, what hit me? We'll explain later, Ritska told him, turning away and seeing the other servants rush across the boarding platform. Almost doing a double take at the burns and bruises on them along with the troubled expression on Ash. He could guess what happened, but for now it would have to wait. We're getting underway, Drake exclaimed, spinning the wheel of the ship and turning it away from the burning remains of the Queen Anne's Revenge as it dissipated into nothing. We're getting Urieli back from that traitorous little knight. Urieli stared at Rendell in silence as the man rode on the boat, the man making not a single sound as he continued on before she eventually spoke. So, I assume you work for someone else. Astute, Rendell answered, he's a pompous ass, but he did summon me. I do have a duty to see it through to the end. Urieli leaned back, frowning, does he have the same tastes as that pervert? No, Rendell shook his head, you need not worry about such things. Admittedly that was Edward's downside, that in his obvious banditry, he sighed, really. I am a king. He paused and raised an eyebrow at Urieli, you seem calmer than I expected. I'm not a fighter, she responded blandly, before smirking, besides, I'd much rather spend my time waiting for Asterios to tear you to pieces. That's going to be quite violent. I wonder if he can match my sister. Charming, Rendell grunted, it won't be long, he sighed, it means I'll have to speak with her again though. We've got time, I can listen, no, probably boring anyway. And Blackbeard goes bye-bye and Sammy goes with him. Also yes, Rendell's noble phantasm did instill a brief state of hollowing onto Ash and Oscar. So that was Ash when he had nothing holding him back and lashed out like an animal. Anyway, Lautrec stats. Lautrec of Karam, Servant, Assassin. Strength, C+. Endurance, D. Agility, B. Mana, D. Luck, B. A+. Noble Phantasm, C. A Firekeeper's Fate, C. Anti-unit max target, 1, max range, 5. Reenacts his habit of killing firekeepers. Without strong enough magic resistance, the target is temporarily blinded. Lautrec can use this to his advantage to either make an escape or strike while they are vulnerable. However, the duration of the blindness is affected by the magic resistance of the target, ranging from a full minute to a few seconds depending on the strength of the resistance. The effect this has on female servants can be considered worse as it is a curse against them, causing them to feel the pain that firekeepers endure to become firekeepers, without the actual damage. However, the length at which this affects them is directly affected with magic resistance. Those with high magic resistance will only feel the pain for a few seconds. Class skills. Presence concealment, D. Personal skills. Ring of Favor, A+. Increases LCK to A+ for a brief moment. Espionage, B+. Enamored of Fina, C. He is truly enamored by the goddess Fina. She is the only woman he loves. He deals extra damage to females. Red Tearstone Ring, C+. In times of crisis when his life is in danger, he will briefly gain strength. Summoning. Oh, human are you? I am Knight Lautrec of Karam. Assassin class servant, how do you do? Dialogue 1. One for patience are you? Well, I see no hurry, hey. Dialogue 2. Not much for offerings, Did I say something? Perhaps you misheard. Dialogue 3. Master and servant, oh dear me. I would say my one true master is my beloved Fina. Dialogue 4. If you have chosen undead. Well then, another lamb to the slaughter it seems. The poor girl was suffering so intently that I couldn't help but wish to show mercy, you know how it is, hey. Dialogue 5. If you have Cecilia, firekeeper. Oh, a firekeeper. How serendipitous, although perhaps I shall need patience. Her unkindled seems to watch me intently. Dialogue 6. If you have patches. Do you have a servant called Trusty Patches? Yura, I swear, I've never met a man who's rubbed me up the wrong way quite like him. You should be careful, but I'd be more than willing to claim his hide. Dialogue 7. If you have Oswald, the Pardoner. Oh, one of those sinful goddess ones, is it? Well, I won't comment about it. I avoid them best I can. Quite troubling people, really. Dialogue 8. If you have Kirk. Stealing humanity for another is it? Well, it is not Fina, but it is fair enough. Some truly have more humanity than they know what to do with. Dialogue 9. If you have female servants. I suppose I'd need to pick carefully. Mistress Fina wouldn't want a common offering to her. Oh, nothing. Dialogue 10. If you have Giles the Rais Caster. Oh, another like-minded person. His savagery. That is his devotion in its own right. Likes. I love Fina, that is all there is to it. I am Lautrec the Embraced, my armor is a symbol of my devotion to her. Hates. Wasteful people, truly. Some have more to give without knowing it. But I'm always there to lend a hand, ha 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 ha. Wish for the Holy Grail. A wish you say. The perfect offering to Fina. Bond level 1. I am Lautrec the Embraced, in helping you, I help my mistress Fina. Bond level 2. I slay for my goddess's offering to her to prove my devotion, although I ask you to provide me with more suitable offerings. Bond level 3. The goddess Fina. Ah, you wish to learn of her as well. She is a caring goddess indeed, willing to love all of us if we love her ourselves. Bond level 4. I kill those with bountiful humanity as offerings to Fina, for that is what she asked of me to do. Bond level 5. I've heard slander that Fina demands such bloodlust as a way of alleviating boredom, I will hear none of it. You shall see, once I offer her the perfect soul, she'll grant me her love. Just as I do. Birthday. Oh, a birthday is it? Good for you. During an event. I wonder what offerings I might find for Fina. 1 St Ascension. As expected of you. 2 ND Ascension. My thanks once again, now I can get to work. 3 RD Ascension. It gets much easier as I am, now I can find the best offering for dear Fina. 4 TH Ascension. HMHMHMHMHAHAHAHAHA. Let us now find an offering for Fina together. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 70. Old Wounds. Dead silence permeated throughout the ship as the stories were recounted to Ash and Oscar. The two undead remained silent for the entire explanation. From the point Rendell had activated his noble phantasm to the point the pair had gone on a rampage. By the end of the story, Ash's expression was blank while Oscar's was hidden behind his helmet, not that it hid away his personal feelings. That much was apparent the moment he turned around and slowly paced over to the edge of the ship and leaned over the railings. From your description, Ash spoke slowly, looking away from Ritska and towards the deck of the ship, myself and Oscar. We hollowed. Oscar supplied with a noticeable crack in his voice. If only briefly. Once again, I was but a burden to others. Do not blame yourself for it. Ash reassured the knight with a troubled expression of his own. I was also caught under the effects of the attack and was less restrained than you were. Yes. Oscar gave an ugly snort. I suppose we should be thankful of my weakness in this instant that I was so easily dealt with. Oscar. I know. He sighed, nodding his head slowly. I know what you meant. Ash-san. The unkindled turned towards Mash as she looked between him and Oscar. What's hollowing? The fate that inevitably awaits all undead, and unkindled. Ash replied, what you saw was what we become, courtesy of the undead curse. He turned to Drake and flattened his expression. It is what I would have become had I followed her lifestyle. Without a sense of duty to chain me to a goal, I would eventually lose sight of my own sanity. That's, Ritska frowned, is that what happens? He looked between Ash and then to the servants of the other world, all of whom remained silent. It is unfortunately, the only way undead like myself can ever truly die. Oscar replied in a cold voice, turning away from the edge of the ship and facing Ritska. Hollowing is a gradual process, the first thing you lose are distant memories. Almost unnoticeable things that even the sane would have trouble recalling. He paused, looking down at his feet. Then you begin to lose more recent memories. Names and faces of loved ones become difficult to place together. Knowledge you've known all your life lies just at the tip of your tongue but never passes beyond your lips. It is the death of a person. Ash carried on, I've seen it occur before. Your mind literally hollows out and leaves but the husk of your body remains. A beast which knows only to kill anything in front of it for no other reason than that is what a beast does. The presence of duty was always a fundamental part of culture in Lordran and Astora. Oscar shrugged. With the undead curse, it became a fundamental part of staying alive. Lose whatever sense of duty that propels you forwards and you'll run the risk of becoming hollow, where your corpse will forever wander the world until someone puts you down. Ritska stared at Oscar, then trailed over to Havel and Sanora. Is that how all of you die? Sanora looked down. I did not contract the undead curse before I died. I was fortunate in that regard, but the majority of the kingdom did. The despair of becoming an undead often drives some to hollow quickly. Oscar's voice became somber. At that point it does not matter if you are in the presence of friends or family, you'll tear them apart with your bare hands all the same. How long has this been around? Ritska asked with a disturbed expression. He'd heard of the curse before but this was far more in-depth than they had previously gone. Since the first age of fire. Ash replied, It's how humans live. He shook his head at their disturbed expressions. It is not always present but the curse of undead always occurs as the flame begins to fade, but the damage it can do in that short period of time is far-reaching and many a kingdom have collapsed because of it. Night King Rendell, who is our enemy. Oscar shrugged. His kingdom of Baldur virtually hollowed overnight. They ripped each other to pieces. It is the undead curse. There is a point where hollowing can no longer become irreversible and we become what you saw. He frowned, looking down. I'd like to offer my apologies for that display. To be caught by an attack like that was. Don't worry about it. Ritska waved his hand, dismissing the apology. We all got caught by that. I forgot where I was or who I was for a few moments as well. I don't get it. Drake scratched the back of her neck. You have to follow a strict life or you got batshit. Oscar looked over to Drake. Has there ever been a moment when you despaired over losing treasure? Well, Drake shrugged. Yeah, but, she trailed off, widening her eyes in understanding. Really? That's it. That is how it would start. Oscar replied with a tired voice. You'd begin to notice the symptoms and if you were unable to offer enough humanity to a bonfire, you'd eventually go hollow. Ritska raised an eyebrow. Humanity. The souls of humans with no curse. Havel answered, turning the attention of the ship to him. The berserker remained standing with his arms crossed at the looks he received. Kill them. Offer humanity to bonfire. You have to kill people to stay sane. David frowned, and offer their souls as sacrifices. Humans are not the only things to contain humanity. Oscar hastily added, trying to stem the new reactions. Humanity is found from other sources, mostly rats. Rats. Romani's confused voice came over the communicator. Why rats? Because they eat human corpses. Oscar replied with a shrug. That is simply how it works. They gorge themselves on those left behind and make for good pickings. Or if you become desperate enough, humans will suffice. And if you don't, you've either got to have a crazy will or you just go insane and die. Drake scowled. Is that really it? Her eyes eventually trailed over to Ash. What about you? I thought you said you were unkindled. Ash frowned. My mental state is different from Oscar's as I have a goal I was instructed to work towards from the moment I was raised. He sighed. Not that I couldn't hollow, but it was far more challenging for myself to, or rather it was simply that we never had a choice. Return the Lords of Cinder to their thrones or hollow, is effectively the directive I was raised with. Is there a cure? Mash asked, looking between the two of them, for the curse. You surely can't have a civilization last long like that. Ash's expression tightened slightly. The linking of the fire removes the evidence of the undead curse and restores humanity. But it is, like I said, temporary. The flame will begin to fade again and the curse appears with it. Who did you piss off to get that? Orion bluntly asked, tilting his head. That's some Prometheus shit right there. Darling. Artemis frowned at him. Orion shrugged in response. Come on, we both know he probably didn't deserve that. He argued before looking back towards the group. So. Spill. Who did it? Wasn't supposed to do that. Havel spoke quietly, His helmet turned and looked off to the side. Dark. Sign. Meant. To. Kanta. In. Dark. Soul. He paused, crossing his arms in front of his chest. Didn't. Work. That. Well. Dark Sue. We can worry about that later. Olga interrupted through the communicator. The more pressing concern is how we can counter his noble phantasm. The director cupped her chin in thought. We would need to prioritize him. If he were to set it off again, then we'd have both Ash and Oscar as little more than berserkers. It did not last as long on myself than Oscar. Ash pointed out before looking to the other servants. I am not sure if I can see a pattern, however. Was everyone else affected by the noble phantasm? Olga inquired, looking around the crew complement. Most of the servants present nodded their heads in affirmation. What about you, Master Fujimaru? Yeah. He nodded his head. I kind of forgot where I was for a few moments. Turning to his left, he stared at Mash. What about you? I did for a little bit, Senpai. Mash admitted with a frown, but I think I recovered quite quickly. Magic resistance perhaps, Romani hypothesized, scratching his cheek. Mash and David have the highest magic resistance present, with Ash as a close second. That might be why it didn't affect those two for as long. He paused, then frowned, although that doesn't account for the way in which they acted. Myself and Oscar not being alive might account for it. Ash offered his way of an answer. As we are both still undead, it might have induced a state of hollowness. Considering that King Rendell's force of undead was never heard from again, it would seem likely that they hollowed at some point. Oscar pointed out, slowly nodding his head, it would seem that myself and Ash are doubly vulnerable to his power, not least of which he was a well-known king. He was. Ritsuka blinked. How well known? As the last king of Baldur, his name was famous for that alone. Oscar shrugged. Aside from his exploits as a king as well, he was said to have cut apart a Hellkite wyvern in single combat. Ritsuka remained silent for a few moments before he spoke up. I assume those are different from the wyverns we normally encounter. Yes. Oscar nodded his head. Usually, he bobbed his head from side to side in thought. Considerably larger from the stories I have heard, although I have never seen one myself. They're much larger than the whelps. Sanora supplied. I actually believed those to be hatchlings of a larger wyvern. Ah, so he's a powerful servant. A king's servant and a knight in the saber class on top of being a dragon slayer to boot. Archer repeated before frowning. Yes, he is likely a powerful servant. I can at least attest to his skill in combat, that he was able to fight off multiple opponents at any one time. But, he's all alone now, right? Ritsuka asked. He doesn't have Blackbeard. But he does have the Grail. Romani frowned, and as much as I would like to think otherwise, I suspect he did not steal it without a plan in mind. Adding on to the fact that with the Grail in his possession, he is naturally going to be receiving a boost to his servant container. A troublesome foe already made worse by external factors. Sanora nodded sagely, looking around the ship, but surely we can overcome his advantage with numbers. Not if he were to employ his noble phantasm again. Ash shook his head. As has already been demonstrated, there is little that myself and Oscar can do to prevent being affected by it, not to mention that the confusion it would cause to all of you would be long enough for him to take out at least one of the servants closest to him. He's right, Ritsuka hesitantly admitted. I completely forgot everything that was around me. Looking up and around at the other servants, he pursed his lips. What about you? For a few moments I was completely lost as well. Boudica admitted with a troubled frown. I had no idea who or where I was. Next thing I knew, she trailed off, pointing towards Ash. It activated my flight or fight response, and it just so happened that everyone else joined in. Saw. Hollow, Havel answered, giving a small shrug. Figured, needed, to, die. So perhaps we take Rendell out at a distance, or at least rush him before he can set off his noble phantasm. Ritsuka suggested. Archer frowned. I should be able to take him out at a distance easily enough. But that would also involve killing Euryale. Asterios snapped his head towards the servants, shooting to his feet, and soon started growling. Which I assume no one would be comfortable with. He finished, directing his attention to Ritsuka and Mash. No. Shaking his head, the master rejected the idea entirely. I'm not going to sacrifice her life like that just because it's the easiest option. He turned to Asterios and gave the berserker a determined look. We're going to get her back, all right. All right. Asterios slowly nodded his head. giving Archer a tiny glare before he sat himself back down. I should like to point out that our current planning does little if we cannot actually catch up to them. David commented, raising his hand and looking around the ship. As it turns out, the enemy servant is actually quite the impressive rower, it seems. Yeah. Drake nodded her head, then snapped her fingers at Ash. Get that funky sword of yours out and start blowing air into the sails. We'll move a lot faster. I'm sure you can multitask with planning and all that as well. Ash gave a single nod in silence, returning Galvatine to his bottomless box and extracting Storm Ruler. Moving across the ship to stand on the upper deck, he leveled the sword towards the sails and began to release a powerful gust of wind from the blade. The ship began to noticeably pick up speed with the increased airflow. Back to the plan. Drake turned back to the crew. So, what do we do? If he uses the noble phantasm again, both Ash and Oscar will hollow. Ritska frowned, cupping his chin, but accurately getting shots at him from a distance is difficult with Euryale on the boat with him. He paused, frowning. He's got to be heading somewhere, surely. You mean to follow him, Senpai? Mash quizzed, tilting her head. Isn't that risky? Ritska nodded his head. Yeah, considering we don't know what he stole Euryale for to begin with. He let out a dry snort. He doesn't strike me as having the same kind of tastes as Blackbeard. Mash shivered at the thought of the pirate. No. He also didn't kill me. Ritska realized, frowning, he just asked me to move out of the way for him. Why? Romani blinked in surprise. You'd think that a servant would take full advantage of such a state and just kill you. Doctor. Mash frowned at him. Don't sound so disappointed. Huh. Romani blanched. And no. That's not what I meant. He hastily argued, waving his hands back and forth. I mean, it doesn't make sense. A master is the prime target on the battlefield and it sounds as though he had the perfect chance to kill Fujimaru-kun. He pointed out, I'm glad that he didn't, but doesn't that bother anyone else? I would have killed him, in his position. Ash shrugged, then noticed the looks he received. What? Most knights don't make a habit of killing the unarmed and helpless. Sanora drawled out at him with an edge to her voice. It is what separates us from simple killers. Crossing her arms, the woman looked towards Ritska. It seems as though he spared you out of a sense of chivalry. That was foolish of him. Archer grunted, ignoring the way in which Sanora looked at him with an aura of irritation. Thanks guys. Ritska gave a thumbs up, really loving this care for my well-being. What I mean, is that it is exploitable. Archer went on, he didn't immediately activate his noble phantasm first, did he? Then raised an eyebrow, nor did Blackbeard have him activated when we first boarded the ship. That would have been the most opportune time. Maybe it's indiscriminate. Olga hummed to herself. The area of effect seemed to cover the entire ship. Perhaps it only became available to him once his temporary allies were all dead. So that means he would be restricted to being a regular servant. Ritska realized, nodding his head. Did he mention anything else? Said he was, scratching her chin. Drake squinted her eyes in thought. Summoned by someone other than Teach, or something. Then he has another master. Ritska nodded to himself, or at least someone he answers to, right. That means they ordered him to take Euryale-san. Mash realized, if we can catch up to him when they arrive, we might be able to rescue her as well as defeat them and reclaim the Grail before they achieve their plans. Exactly. Ritska gave the shielder a thumbs up, then turned to the archer. Head up to the crow's nest, keep an eye out and let us know how far Rendell is from us and if you can see where he's heading. Very well. Archer nodded his head, moving towards the mast of the ship to begin climbing up. We'll keep our distance so as to not be caught in his noble phantasm again, but not too far that we can't close the distance quickly. Ritska affirmed, looking at Drake. Is that possible? I mean, sure. Drake shrugged, throwing a thumb over her shoulder and gesturing to Ash. I can tell him when we need more and less wind. All right. Ritska nodded to himself. Everyone else can prepare for combat, considering we don't know who Rendell is heading for and how many servants they might have. It's best to be prepared just in case. Should I head to the front of the ship, Senpai? Mash asked, hefting her shield up for reference. If we get attacked, I can activate Lord Chaldeas to shield us. Smart move. Ritska smiled at her, causing the shielder to give a beaming smile at the praise. Just be careful, alright? Yes, Senpai. Mash darted past him, quickly moving to the front of the ship and standing to attention. Ritska looked towards the starboard side. Asterios still sat down leaning against the railings. Pursing his lips, Ritska moved towards the berserker, Asterios. The Minotaur looked up at him. Yes. I know you want to rescue Euryale. He gestured to himself and then sent a sweeping arm across the ship. We all want to as well. But you're going to have to be patient. If we try to rescue her now, then Rendell will use his noble phantasm to escape. Which means that we'll have to wait until he can't. He paused, his lips pulled themselves into a tight frown. It means we'll have to wait until we encounter whoever it is that wants Euryale. While it is more dangerous, if we pull it off we'll be able to reclaim the Grail and take out the people who want Euryale. Asterios stared at him in silence, his face troubled before he eventually spoke in a slow and somewhat unsure tone. If we wait, we can get all people who want Euryale. Yes. Ritska nodded. We can take out all the people who want to capture Euryale at once. He sighed. I'm asking a lot from you, as her protector, but I want you to know that I'm going to do everything I can to help you get her back. All right. All right. Asterios nodded his head, giving a tiny smile. Thank you. Ritska smiled back. Don't mention it. Straightening himself back up, he turned away and managed to get a few feet before Oscar appeared in the corner of his eye. The saber staring at him. Did you need something, Oscar? Perhaps not so much need as, Oscar trailed off, shaking his head. No. It is something I must say. He exhaled, stepping closer to Ritska and bowing his head low. I have shamed myself into falling to hollowness once again. However, I swear to you that I shall reward this faith you have placed in me. All right. Ritska blinked, stepping back slightly. I'm appreciative, but you don't have to go that. I do. Oscar cut him off sharply. It is my great shame. You placed your faith in me and not moments later did I hollow and attempt to claim your life. That wasn't your fault. Ritska argued. You couldn't have known. None of us could have known. Oscar remained silent. Nevertheless, he spoke out. For this faith, this trust you have placed in me, I shall see to it I live up to it. In the name of my status as a knight of Astora and the one who gave me this chance to begin with. He slammed his fist into his chest. I ask, nay, I beg you. Please, give me the chance to right this wrong I have dealt you. Staring at the knight with a pensive expression, Ritska eventually nodded his head slowly. I don't think there's anything to forgive, but all right. If that's how you feel, I can't exactly say no to that. He then twitched his lip upwards. Besides, you're already helping us. I can't imagine what more I could possibly need from you. But I accept your pledge. He held out his hand towards the knight. We'll see this through together, right? Oscar stared at the hand, his own slowly removed itself from his chest and reached out to clasp it in a handshake. Yes, I will ensure you see. Ritska corrected him, we're going to see this singularity through. We. Oscar quietly muttered to himself, then nodded his head. Very well, we shall. He remained silent for a few moments then let out a shaky breath. Thank you, truly. Anytime. The master smiled back at him. Drake remained silent as she steered the ship for a few moments. The only sound to be heard was the howl of wind rushing out from Ash's sword as he powered the sails. The saber remained silent the entire way there. So, Drake eventually got out. I would have gone crazy, huh? Most likely. Ash replied, or mutated into a creature. He added on not long after. Drake paused and looked over her shoulder towards the saber. Huh. The soul has a great impact over how the person is reflected. Ash replied, hollow souls are often pure white because there is nothing noteworthy about them. Those who lost themselves to desires. I suppose Aldrich was a glutton. He shrugged. That is how Hawkwood made him sound, one driven by sheer insatiable hunger for, well, anything. At first it was men. What kind of hunger are we talking about here? Drake inquired, giving a slightly raised eyebrow and a mildly suspicious look, like physical or, lust. Ash's eyes turned to give her a dull look. He was a cannibal. Charming. Scoffing, she turned back to the ship. Nice to know I'm held in such high regard. He ate so much that his body bloated and then softened into sludge. Again, thanks for the compliment. And his soul reflected that. It was a twisted, poisonous little thing. Ash went on, ignoring the running commentary, as for how greatly your own sense of greed would have affected your appearance. I cannot say. Osiris was driven by obsession and became a blind, scaleless dragon. And here I am, doing all I like without having to worry about such terrible consequences, huh? Drake nodded her head. Well, I imagine that pisses you off quite a bit. It does. Ash answered immediately, you abuse the complete lack of consequences to do whatever pleases you in the moment. I wouldn't say lack of consequences. Drake wryly spoke, I can still die. You think I regard death as a consequence? Ash scoffed, people wish they could die. They avoid living the types of life you lead so that they don't lose themselves to hollowing in the desperate hope they live long enough for the curse to fade. Alright. Drake shrugged, and when they aren't afflicted by the curse, the consequences of mutation remain. Ash replied, completely stone-faced, your way of life will never make sense to me. It is one bound by neither duty nor purpose, and somehow you seem to achieve grander things than those with better sense. It is a life of avarice, which would drive anyone with the curse insane, and it is rewarded time and time again. He looked at her back, it is not something I will ever accept. I can tolerate you, he added with a slight edge to his voice, but I will never accept you. Don't bite it till you try it. Drake chuckled, come on, what were you going to do when you got cured? There's gotta be something. Die. Huh, I was going to die. Ash replied in a cold voice. I was raised from my grave for a specific purpose. The notion of a second life from the very beginning was impossible for me to obtain. All I could do was fulfill my objective or hollow. That's shit. Drake scowled, turning around to face Ash fully. You get brought back to, what was it again? Link the fire, which cures the curse. Right. Drake's scowl deepened, you get brought back for that, and the moment it's done you get to enjoy none of the benefits of it. That's cruel. It is what it is. Ash shrugged, link the fire and propagate the age, hollow, or, let the flame fade. What happens if it fades? Who knows? Ash shrugged, I was told that either the world would be consumed with the abyss and be destroyed, humans would find themselves free of the influence of the gods and prosper, or nothing would happen but losing the last possible method of curing the undead curse. What a choice. Drake frowned, the second one sounds better. The second one was also what Aldrich strove for in his lust for power. It is what Sullivan the Butcher strove for, and it is what Uriah strove for. He frowned, none of them would be what I consider decent folk. Does it make it bad? I would never experience it, so it doesn't matter what I would make of it. Ash's lips thinned, from the beginning, that line of thinking was not meant for me. I was raised for a specific purpose and nothing more. That's just sad. Drake shook her head, are you still affected by the curse or whatever? Ash pointedly ignored the, whatever, part of the sentence. The physical aspects of the curse still affect me, however I do not believe I am capable of hollowing. So, I don't know. Enjoy yourself. Drake exclaimed, do whatever you want. Why are you still like, she gestured to him up and down, like that? Because this is all I am. Ash offered the only answer he could think of, there is nothing more I can be. No ambition. Drake shook her head, turning around and grasping the wheel once again, that's your problem. No ambition at all. Don't know if it's your fault or not, but I hope you get something to fight for. You ever swung that sword of yours because you wanted to? Want? Ash raised an eyebrow, what would my own desire have to do with the outcome? Personal attachment leads to issues. Fuck it. Drake sighed, have you ever done something you didn't need to do? Ash remained silent for a few moments. Yes. There have been instances where I acted when it wasn't necessary. He spoke in a slightly guilty tone, times where I performed acts which could be argued to be for my own personal greed, if you would. Hope for you yet then, It got my only friend killed. Oh. Drake went silent. What happened? He was a thief. Ash replied, I found him while exploring the high wall of Lothric. He was trapped in a cell. I freed him and he returned to Firelink Shrine. Drake listened to him in silence, still focusing on steering the ship. He considered it a debt he needed to be repaid and therefore offered me his services as a scavenger. He would explore places I had been and collect goods which could be of use to me. Ash remained silent. At first it was purely an agreement between us, he would pick clean from the deceased and I would offer him payment for the goods he provided. Didn't stay like that though, did it? No. Ash shook his head, Eventually I looked forwards to see what trinkets he had uncovered, in turn he would look forward to speaking with me. He took purpose in thieving. Huh. Drake released a good-natured huff. Didn't think you'd be the type to make friends with a thief. He never once stole for himself. Ash explained, even before he was imprisoned, he would steal for the citizens of his town from the more surplus areas of the kingdom. Thief with a heart of gold, eh. Drake laughed a little louder that time. He seemed like a good man. In spite of his occupation, he was. Ash nodded his head. We quickly became friends soon after. Each time he would go out on a raid I would perhaps anticipate what he would find. I always found some use for it. What changed? Irithil. Ash's tone turned frozen. Had it not been for the intervention of a passing knight, he would have died. In truth, I had long since found better sources of acquiring materials, but you didn't want to ditch your pal. Drake nodded her head. That's fair. Well, I eventually made my way to Lothric Castle. Gririt once again offered to loot the place clean for me and he trailed off. In truth, I should have told him no, but when I thought of what he might find there and what I might do with it, I allowed my own self-interest to guide me. Gririt went to Lothric Castle. He went silent for a few moments. When he failed to return after several days, I went in search of him. I happened upon his broken corpse. He looked to Drake. He died alone and for my sake when it wasn't necessary and all because I couldn't contain my own self-interest. My first friend, who regarded me as such as well, and I got him killed. His eyes narrowed. So no, I won't do what I want, as you ask. Looking away from her and straight ahead, his expression turned blank, because I won't let anyone else die for my own desires, because they aren't worth dying for, and Gririt shouldn't have died for my sake. He was a thief, he was a lowborn, and he was a better man than I could ever be. That's rough. Drake quietly replied, first time you ever decide to do something for yourself and your pal gets killed. She sighed, with a history like that. I suppose I can see why you would be hesitant. She paused, did he have to help you? What, your friend? Drake inquired further, did he have to help you? Was he like you? He offered me his services as a thief. Ash replied, but he wasn't bound to my whims. So I suppose he didn't have to help me. So he did it for his own desire then. She nodded her head. Don't. Ash frowned, don't use that line of reasoning. He did follow his own desire to help me and he did seem to enjoy it. It also got him killed. He looked straight ahead. It would have been better for the both of us if we had restrained ourselves. But then you never would have been friends with him. He'd still be alive. Ash scoffed, my friendship isn't equal to his life. Don't disrespect his bond like that. Drake frowned, maybe it didn't mean that much to you, but if this guy was willing to brave all these horrific places just for one guy, I'd say your friendship meant a lot to him. She shrugged, but I haven't met the guy, so I'm just guessing. HMPH. Ash grunted noncommittally. The two fell back into complete silence, neither noticing Boudica stood not far from them. Her eyes resting up Ash with a frown on her face before she turned away and moved back down the stairs and onto the main deck. You're looking a little skipper than last time. David remarked the moment he was in earshot. Oscar jolted from his spot as he cleaned the cannons, looking towards David and giving a single nod. Something good happen? He asked, giving a conspiratorial smile as he did so. Perhaps. Oscar admitted with a good-natured chuckle, it is simply that. I suppose someone saying to my face they had faith in me was quite the surprise. Having people rely on you is both a blessing and a curse. David sagely nodded his head. For them to state they have trust in your judgment and abilities is testament to their skill in your own character. It can be an endless source of joy to know people can rely on your strength. He sighed, although there are also the expectations that come with such reliance. The fear of failure is quite a nasty shadow indeed. Oscar stared at him before slowly nodding his head. Failure is something I am all too familiar with, but I will not allow it this time, he affirmed to David, perhaps because I am not just fighting for myself. That's the spirit. The archer enthusiastically beamed, reaching over and patting the man on the back. Just don't drive yourself crazy trying to do everything yourself. Living up to other people's expectations rather than your own is a surefire way of always being disappointed, no matter what. Sometimes, I forget that you are also a king. Oscar pointed out, resting his left arm on his knee. You can go from unaware to gifting sage advice at the turn of the sun, and it is both amazing and somewhat jarring to witness. I like to think this is just another way of being kingly. David replied with a shrug, not everyone really needs big crowns and fancy castles, although those are also nice as well. I suppose what I really wanted out of my kingship was your temple to God. Oscar finished, I've heard. Build a great temple for worship because that is your role as a follower of his. Nodding his head, the knight smiled behind his helm. It is both a lofty and admirable goal for you. You think so too? David smiled. Well, also because it will be quite popular with women. And there goes the image of royalty. Oscar sighed, causing David to pout at him, as fleeting as it is welcome, however. So you would rather I act like a king more often than not? I would not say that. Oscar shook his head. The you that is the humble shepherd is just as gratifying to see as the you that was the king of a great nation. If only because it convinces me that not all those in legends might not be quite so grandiose as the stories make them seem to be, and yet you still act as is expected of you. I like to think I act as is expected of a servant of God. David crossed his arms, leaning on the railings of the ship and staring down at Oscar with a thoughtful expression. I am aware this is not myself, as I appeared when I was alive, yet I am still a servant of God regardless, so that is how I am manifested. You believe your current self to be a servant of God. Oscar tilted his head. How can you be sure nothing is by chance? Because that is what it means to be a servant of God. David answered, everything that occurs does so within his plan. Acts of evil bring about the capacity for good, greed brings about the capacity for charity, and cowardice brings about the capacity for heroics. His lips thinned. I will not make the claim that God is good or evil because that is not what he is about. God is God. That is simply how he is, and it's not for me to understand his motives. He smiled and spread his arms wide, because I am just a humble messenger of his will. Nothing more, nothing less. Just because I was a king did not make me any more or less important in his eyes. Just as you are not less important than anyone else on this ship. He nodded to the crew. Those legends you see around you, true, they are people who did extraordinary things, but you missed the most important aspect about them. Oscar tilted his head, that being, they are still people, just like you and me. He paused, blinking several times. I completely forget what brought about that to begin with. Oscar laughed, shaking his head and standing up. You were speaking of nothing being by chance. Ah, yes. David nodded. Summoning themselves are a miracle. They occur and we never know if they might occur again. So, he stepped forwards and placed a hand on his shoulder. You have some role to play. Remember that. Perhaps it is a mere chance as you say, but that just makes your being here all the more miraculous. Miraculous, you say? Oscar hummed in thought. I once thought so of my affliction. Having known of the prophecy, I truly believed I would have a chance to complete it, but I failed. David raised an eyebrow and looked him up and down. Servants are only summoned because they are typically well known, he pointed out. It was because I freed the one who would become the legend. Oscar explained away. I owe my very being here because of them and, well, the rest is, as they say, history. But without you, they never would have been able to achieve that. David remarked, that tiny little act by Oscar of Astora was so profound that you apparently birthed a whole legend. That is something to take pride in, no. Perhaps. Oscar admitted with a quiet tone, but this time I will not be a burden to others. This faith that has been placed in me that I might achieve something, I will be certain to reward it with my entire being. Very well. David nodded his head, but don't get careless now. It would be quite unfortunate if you were to die. Who would take my fishing advice? Advice? Oscar blinked at the man. You just yelled encouragement at me the entire time. I do not believe you supplied me with advice once. Ah, but without my encouragement, you might not have had the will to catch the fish. David pointed out with a self-satisfied smile. That is what matters most, is it not? I do not believe that is how it works in the least. Oscar frowned. It sounds more as if you are trying to take credit for. Ha ha ha. David let out a boisterous laugh, turning around and walking away from Oscar without hearing the rest of the sentence. Ritska turned around at the sound of laughter, raising an eyebrow as he watched David wander away from a rather confused Oscar and further into the ship as he did so. The master frowned in bewilderment at the situation before turning to his left, seeing Mash with a similarly puzzled look on her face. What do you think David-san was laughing about, senpai? She asked, a hint of interest in her voice. Ritsuka shrugged in response. Who knows? His lip twitched as he looked at his communicator. Roman, what do you think he was laugh? Something ridiculous, no doubt. Romani answered almost immediately in a tired voice. I don't see why you'd ask me either. Because I was curious as to what you would say. Ritsuka replied unashamedly. A long sigh came from the other end of the communicator. Are you really using my reactions to King David as ways to alleviate your boredom? I mean, maybe. Senpai, Mash stared at him with a slightly disappointed look. Please don't encourage the doctor's reactions for humor. He might get the wrong idea and try to lighten our mood more often. Et tu, Mash. Romani dramatically gasped before giving a dry chuckle, but you really should be more focused on your mission. He's right. Olga commented. A pause followed after her before the woman made a disturbed noise. I can't believe I just said that. Am I just everyone's stress relief or something? Depends on what kind of stress Da Vinci uses you to relieve. Carrie called across. A sputtered sound followed as Romani sounded as though he was dying. Ritsuka bit his lip to avoid laughing while Mash stared at the communicator and then towards him. Senpai. What's wrong? I know Da Vinci sometimes makes comments about Dr. Roman, but… What are we, children? Olga's annoyed voice cut her off. I see you laughing over there, Maxwell Dustin. Stop. .. Yes, director. The man's voice sounded out soon after. Good. Perhaps we can get some professionalism back in Chaldea. She grunted disapprovingly. Now then, your plan. It is risky but it has merit. Allowing Saber to lead us to his allies saves us a great deal of time in having to search for them instead. However, how certain are you that you will be able to save the archer before she is taken captive and used for whatever the servants intend? Pretty confident. Ritsuka replied. We're sure that once he's around his allies, Rendell won't be able to use his noble phantasm without affecting them as well. Very well, but remain on the side of caution. She insisted. I will not have you taking pointless risks, understood? You are too vital for this mission for you to throw your life away on an unnecessary and potentially dangerous maneuver. Yes, director. Ritsuka nodded his head in understanding. Good. Mash, keep him safe. Yes, director. Mash nodded her head as well, then looked to Ritsuka as he turned the communicator off. I think she's really getting better, senpai. She even said your plan was good. She did, didn't she? Ritsuka smiled slightly. I wonder if we're growing on her. Maybe. Mash pondered aloud. I wonder if I can see them. Archer's voice in Ritsuka's head cut off whatever Mash said. The master turned away from the shielder and looked up. They're making good speed but we should catch up to them swiftly. Good. Any sign of where they're going? Not as of yet. Archer replied with an audible frown. Ritsuka was beginning to notice that Archer didn't do a lot of smiling. Before he continued on, I will inform you if that changes. Thanks for the heads up. Ritsuka earnestly replied back before turning around to face the rest of the ship. Archer said he can see them. We should catch up with them soon but he can't see where they're headed yet. Good. Drake called back from the other end of the ship. Keep him in sight. Wait until we can see his pals. It had been easier said than done. Ritsuka idly tapped the railings of the ship as he stared out across the ocean. They had long since managed to get close enough that even he could see Rendell's rowboat in the distance as a faint speck, and yet they had seen no sign of anything even remotely resembling another enemy presence. How long is it now, Mash? 1 hour and 2 minutes, senpai. Mash dutifully answered him as she held her own slightly bored expression. Do you think he is almost there? I hope so. Ritsuka sighed, then frowned. Do you think he's leading us into a trap? It's a possibility. Ritsuka and Mash jolted, spinning around to find Sanora stood behind them with her arms crossed and a thoughtful expression on her face. From what I have heard from the crew of this ship, these waters are treacherous. She paused, moving her left hand up and cupping her chin, and yet it might place his prize in too great a danger if he were to lead them to a chance encounter with a sea monster. So it would have to be a trap of his own allies. Ritsuka suggested, which is sort of what we want to begin with. There is a marked difference between catching an adversary by surprise and being caught by surprise. Sanora corrected before her lips pursed. But yes, that is what we want. Well, is it really an ambush if we're expecting it? I do not think that the ambush ceases to be an ambush. Sanora replied, then frowned. Unless, is it really being taken by surprise anymore? Exactly, so what does it become? An act of self-harm. Sanora shrugged. If we knowingly wander into a trap, that is how I would describe it, or bravado, or stupidity. Which would you say we classify as? Ritsuka asked with a sense of curiosity. Perhaps a little bit of both. Sanora answered with a strained expression. Even if our complement of crew members is rather large, powerful and extremely skilled, she trailed off, her expression freezing on her face. I am struggling to see what manner of ambush could fell not just Havel the Rock but also Milady Artemis. Milady? Ritsuka raised an eyebrow at her. Why yes. Sanora replied, looking between Mash and Ritsuka with a slight shakiness in her voice. I'm not being too forceful, am I? She asked, her expression now worried. Because I'm a servant of the gods and then I just found a goddess, so I thought it would be best if I offered her my services, but I don't want to come off as being a bother to her, that I am accusing her of being helpless and needing my aid. I know she chooses her own hunters because that's what her consort said, but I feel as though I might have just barged in and taken a spot all on my own. She hastily explained, looking at the two of them with a distraught expression. I wasn't too arrogant in doing that, was I? Mash and Ritsuka stared at her with wide eyes, then shared a glance with each other before looking back at her. I'm sure it's fine, Ritsuka assured her with a faint smile, then directed his attention over her shoulder and towards the goddess in question. She can be very straightforward when she wants to be, so I'd imagine she doesn't dislike having you around. Really? Sanora let out a sigh of relief, composing herself. That's good, I'd been worried, so I thought I should check, but I didn't want to try and bother her with my own issues. Shaking her head, she steeled her expression. Regardless, as I was saying, I believe we are more than equipped to handle anything we should come across. And she just jinxed it. Romani helpfully supplied through the communicator, although maybe, oh. Ritsuka looked at his communicator. What do you mean, oh? Is that a good, oh, or a bad, oh? He inquired with a gradually deteriorating look of calm. Well, it's an, oh, that's a little strange, type of, oh. Romani replied, you've got a faint magical disturbance ahead of you, but it's weird. A bit faint, like a weather disturbance. Weather disturbance? Ritsuka frowned, like a storm. No, nothing that powerful, but it isn't natural. Romani explained further, you should be able to see it soon, it's about 2 miles out ahead of you. Archer. Roman says that he can detect a magical disturbance about 2 miles ahead of us. Can you see anything? Ritsuka asked as he looked up towards the crow's nest. I can see a fog upon the surface of the water. Archer replied back, that is likely the disturbance he detected. Rendell is sailing towards it. He's sailing towards the disturbance. Ritsuka explained to the others present. Archer says he can see a fog on the surface of the water. It's not a powerful spell, but as a form of concealment. Romani trailed off meaningfully. It would stop anyone from seeing them at a distance. Ritsuka surmised, so that might be where his allies are hiding. But, doesn't he know we're still following him? Mash frowned. Why would he continue to sail towards his allies if he knows we're following him? Sanora frowned. He either has no alternative remaining to him, or he's confident that he might be able to lose us in the fog. She paused, then nodded her head, which would be possible for him if he sails through it. So we'll need to keep close. Ritsuka surmised, turning away from the Lancer and quickly moving through the ship towards Drake and Ash. Bounding up the stairs, Ritsuka came to a halt on the top step and faced the captain. We got something else? Drake asked, looking down at him. Ash also looked slightly down from his own position towards her. Rendell's heading for a smokescreen on the water. Roman says it's magical. He explained quickly. The captain frowned. He could be trying to lose us in the mist. The woman admitted, but if it ain't a natural fog. She paused, tilting her head and staring at Ritsuka with slight confusion. I thought nothing in this ocean was all that natural. Ritsuka shrugged. Even if it isn't where his allies are hiding, we don't want to risk losing him in the fog. Try and catch him before he enters then. Drake asked. Ritsuka nodded in affirmation. All right then. Turning to Ash, she gave him a single nod. Very well. Ash nodded his head in return, pulling his sword arm back as far as he could. The winds around the blade began to intensify and howl to the point they started to buffet at Drake's hair, and even Ritsuka could feel the intensity to them. Releasing a grunt, He thrust the sword forwards and released a veritable storm of wind like a cannon from the sword. The vortex slammed into the sails and caused the entire ship to jerk forwards at the sudden increase in speeds. Ritska stumbled forwards, catching himself on the stair railings to avoid face-planting the upper deck while Drake clamped her hands onto the steering wheel to avoid falling backwards. Frowning, the captain looked over her shoulder at the saber and gave him an annoyed expression. A little warning would have been nice, you know. Ash shrugged unapologetically. I don't know what you were expecting would happen. Rolling her eyes, Drake turned away from the unkindled and looked to Ritska before giving him a lopsided smile and a half shrug as if to say, what can you do? Ritska snorted and shook his head. Okay, that's really weird now. Romani's voice came back over the communicator. Looking down at it, Ritska raised an eyebrow. What is? The fog, if these instruments are correct it's changed course. Olga's voice came through with a noticeable edge to it. The magical disturbance has started headed in your direction at impressive speeds. At your current rate of acceleration, taking into account the speed the fog moves in, there was a silence as the director looked over the instruments. You'll both intercept the saber at the same time. We can assume this fog is the work of a caster, and a skilled one at that. The woman admitted with a nervous tinge to her voice. It missed earlier because we weren't fully examining it, but that fog is more akin to a mobile bounded field. A what? A loud sigh followed. Think of a bounded field as a sphere of influence that a magus has control over, usually limited to a specific area of effect. The results can be wildly differing, but the basic principle remains the same. Once they are set around a certain location, it shouldn't be possible for them to move. But you just said, I know. She cut him off sharply. It means this particular caster is likely extraordinarily skilled at their craft to construct one capable of movement. Unless it was constructed around a specific area, such as a ship, but even then it shouldn't normally be this powerful as to prevent us from scanning it directly. So they're hiding themselves from us. Ritska frowned, and if Rendell reaches there before us? A bounded field exists to protect the caster. Olga explained further. It means charging into another magus territory of that caliber would be a near-suicidal idea, regardless of how many servants you have. With no way of knowing what's inside of it. It would be very bad. Ritska bit his lip. All right, we'll try and catch Rendell first then. You don't seem that worried. Urieli commented as she checked her nails, giving a bored look as she stared up and looked over Rendell's shoulder at the gradually growing shape of the golden hind closing in on them. I have no reason to be. Rendell replied back as he continued to row. We shall be with my allies soon, and this affair will be put swiftly behind us. Aren't you confident? Urieli snarked with a smug expression, but it seems a little early to count your blessings yet. She paused, leaning back and gesturing to herself. I realize that my beauty might fool you into believing you are blessed with luck, but as it stands now. Rendell tuned her out, his eyes still set upon the growing wall of fog that he was approaching. They'd at least make it there around the same time, by his own estimations, and if half the things that man had said about his friend were true, then it might even the playing field just a little. If half of the information provided to him upon his summoning were true as well. The other one wasn't that bad, but she certainly was more crass. He was steeling himself for whatever vulgar display of language she would hurl at him the moment they arrived. It was tiresome to say the least. Not that he could do much, anything he'd say would likely spur some manner of reaction from her. He noticed that the goddess was still speaking as well, his features remained a perfect mask as he rode. It really was quite a tiresome affair he was involved in. They're slowing down. Ritska leaned over the railings as he stared ahead of the ship, turning around just in time to see Ash lower his sword. The fog wall also had slowed as they approached it. Rendell's rowboat now only 100 meters away from the ship as they closed in on it. Does everyone have sight on Rendell? I do. Artemis helpfully called out, waving to Ritska jubilantly while holding her bow in one hand. Should I shoot them now? No, you, Orion grumbled. Wait until he tells you to shoot them, all right. Okay. Right. Ritska nodded his head and turned to Mash. Be ready in case anyone tries to attack us with range. Yes, Senpai. Should we try and ask him to surrender? Ritska wondered, looking around, is that a thing we should do? Because I sort of want to at least give them the opportunity to end this peacefully. It can't hurt, Senpai. Mash pointed out, smiling, it would be nice if we were able to finish this singularity like that. It would, wouldn't it? Ritska mumbled, then turned back to face the ship. Now, he trailed off, staring at the fog with squinted eyes. Is it me or is that fog thinning? I believe it is, senpai. Mash supported him as she looked at the fog as well. I wonder if they're dispelling the bounded field. Well, I suppose that answers our case. Ritska sharply cut himself off, his eyes fixing upon something and then bulging. Captain. He suddenly exclaimed, stepping backwards. Captain. Why yeah. Drake called back, slightly shocked at the sudden tonal shift. Look. Ritska pointed out across the bow of the ship into the fog. Drake followed his finger and instantly found what had him so concerned. Oh fuck. The woman exclaimed in equal levels of shock as she began to turn the wheel of the ship, steering it starboard as the dissipating fog began to reveal a shape. Emerging from the mist in a disturbingly graceful manner was a ship far larger than the Golden Hind, the galley seemingly manifested as the fog faded away into the winds. The larger ship eventually came to a stop directly in front of Rendell's rowboat. The Golden Hind was also halted behind the ship, with barely 30 meters distance between the two vessels. Fujimaru-kun. Romani's panicked voice came through the communicator. I'm detecting multiple spirit origins in front of you. They came out of nowhere and these readings they give off. How much trouble are we in? Ritska anxiously whispered to the doctor. A rather shrill and arrogant voice cut him off before the doctor could answer. I suppose it's best to meet one's adversaries at the climax. Ritska's head snapped towards the ship. A mop of blonde hair moved across the deck until its owner revealed himself in full. The man wearing a well-decorated white tunic and deep emerald eyes scanned the Golden Hind with a dismissive glance. Quite the rabble I see before me as well. The man scoffed, resting his hands on the edge of the ship and staring down at them. I'm almost insulted that such a group dares to think themselves worthy of standing against a king. He paused then laughed, but I suppose you wouldn't be villains worthy of facing me if you didn't have some outrageous confidence about you. Ritska blinked, exchanging a glance with Mash and then looking back at the man. Well, he looked down at the rowboat and smiled. I see you managed to get the goddess, Rendell. Not bad, although I suppose it is expected of a former king to be competent. Still, he trailed off, shaking his head and giving a carefree smile. Did you really have to let the rabble follow you so closely behind? It was unavoidable. Rendell called back, but it is better to wipe them out now and be done with it than have to go searching for them. At least this way we can remove any opposition. True, but that's lacking in drama. The man frowned. Where would be the sense of occasion? This is to be the birth of my nation. I want glorious songs sung of this moment. You can always exaggerate the tales, Lord Jason. Ritska followed the direction of the new voice, soon seeing a small girl with violet-colored hair dressed in a rather intricate dress of the same color wielding a staff. He paused, looking over his shoulder as he heard heavy thuds. Sure enough, Havel stood directly behind them with his gaze fixed solely upon the girl. I suppose that's true. The man, Jason, sighed. They don't look like they'd be worthy of so much as a footnote, but we have to make do with what we have available to us, don't we, Medea? Wait a moment here. Olga exclaimed, dread in her voice. Jason and Medea. But if that's them, then that ship is. The Argo, Mash breathed out, her own eyes going wide. Then those are the Argonauts. Oh. Ritska blinked, suddenly paling. Why, you don't think they have? Jason looked over at the group and smiled, seemingly pleased with their reactions. Those are some nice faces you have there, finally realizing the error of your ways when faced with true heroes. I suppose I shouldn't blame you, lowly peons that you are, for feeling that way. I suppose facing down the Argonauts isn't something one would look forward to. Giving a laugh, he snapped his fingers. Or is it my friend who scares you so? Heavy footsteps followed. Ritska's eyes trailed up behind Jason and Medea towards the third figure who loomed over them. He heard Mash do a sharp intake of breath as the giant made his presence known. To call them a man wouldn't be to do their appearance justice. They dwarfed over both Jason and Medea. Ritska was even sure they were taller than Havel. His physique was nothing shy of monstrous, with the sheer presence he had, with his arm muscles being as thick as Ritska's torso. Dark scraggly hair drifted down the back of the servant's head as their eyes locked onto Ritska and the others. The dark-skinned giant stared deeply at them and narrowed their eyes. In his right hand was tightly gripped a weapon which had more in common with a sharpened piece of slab than a sword, and was most certainly taller than Ritska was. Don't feel too bad, Heracles does have that effect on villains. Jason boasted, "That's just how he is. Why the fuck do you keep boasting about him?" A rather rough third voice joined in, another figure moved to the front of the ship. A tanned woman with a white bodysuit and similarly covered hair, a long red pole spear with a black blade at the top on her shoulder with an annoyed scowl present on her face. "He's literally the only reason your dumbass actually achieved anything. We could have gotten a fucking monkey to steer this ship and nothing would have changed." Ritska snorted, quickly covering it with a cough. Jason scowled at the tanned woman. "I don't see what you have to complain about, seeing as how we could have ditched you entirely and just had Heracles." The woman's features darkened considerably. "Listen here, you little shit. Lord Canius," Medea interrupted politely, "perhaps it would be best to save your complaints until after we have dealt with our foes." "Huh." Canius scowled at the witch and then peered over at the Golden Hind, her lip curled as she stared at the crew compliment. "What, these fucking losers?" She gestured to them before releasing a dismissive scoff. "I may as well make my complaints now considering it's going to take us all of 5 seconds to kill them." "That seems a little overconfident on your part, no?" Oscar commented back as he moved to stand next to Ritska and Mash. "From my count, we still outnumber you a good deal." "Yeah. And fish outnumber sharks, ain't never heard of a fucking minnow taking out one of them." Canius hollered back. "Way I see it, you're a colorful batch of clowns. What is that, a fucking statue?" She pointed at Havel. "Looks like someone's fucking garden ornament." "Bitch," Havel grunted back. "Ha." Canius grinned maliciously. "See if you're still so confident when I come over there and rip that stupid looking helmet off your head and crush your dumbass skull like a grape. Will you be quiet?" Jason snapped at her. "I will not have my image damaged by your brutish mannerisms. I am trying to appear like the great hero." "You." Havel cut him off, pointing at Medea. The witch blinked at the sudden addresses and tilted her head. "Yes. You, Sork. She frowned. "I am a magus, but if you simply referred to as spellcrafter." "Good." Havel grunted, shouldering his large club. "Haven't killed sorcerer in while." A deep rumbling chuckle emerged from the helmet. "Been too long." "I take it back, I like this guy." Canius snorted, shaking her head and grinning at Medea's lack of reaction. "Come on, this guy just said he's gunning for your hide, you ain't got anything to say." "He would have to get past Heracles first," Medea pointed out, smiling coldly. "I doubt he can manage that." "You sure?" She raised an eyebrow and shrugged. "Hey, your funeral." "Enough of this." Jason cut them off. "Rendell." He looked down at the king. "You have the Grail as well." "Indeed," Rendell answered. Jason grinned. "Good. Bring it and the goddess over to us, then we can do away with these nuisances and begin." "I think not, you brat," Drake shouted out as she pushed her way to the front. "You. Hello, brother." Artemis, voice cut her off. The attention of all 3 ships fell onto the goddess floating up and waving towards the Argonauts, specifically Heracles. "It's me, Artemis. Remember me? I even brought Darling," she exclaimed, hoisting up Orion. "See Darling. It's Heracles." "What possessed you to do this to me?" Orion whimpered out as the Argonauts squinted at her. "Lady Artemis." Jason blinked. "And Orion." He turned around and stared at Heracles. The berserker remained silent although his shoulders faintly moved as if to simulate a shrug. Canius began to laugh in the background at the sight of the hunter-turned-stuffed animal. "Never mind." Jason shook his head, turning around. "If you have the blessings of the goddess of the hunt on your side, I suppose you might be fitting foes yet," he exclaimed victoriously, still glancing between them and Artemis. "Ash," Ritska called through the mental link. "When I give the signal, I want you to shoot wind at the water." "The water?" Ash's confused voice came back. "Why?" "Hopefully the whirlpool will provide enough of a distraction. Everyone else, lay down some artillery on the Argo while we try to rescue Euryale. With luck, Rendell will be forced to flee." "What of the Grail?" Boudica asked through the link. "Surely we can't lose that." "Whatever they want, they need both the Grail and Euryale for it. If we rescue Euryale, we should at least be able to put a stop to whatever they plan for a little bit." Ash slowly began to move to the front of the ship, his hand resting upon Storm Ruler and occasionally darting towards the water as he approached the front. "This entire affair just might be worth my time now." Jason smirked, causing Drake's scowl to worsen. "You saying I wasn't worth your time before, you little brat?" My, you certainly lack courtesy when speaking to a king. Jason shook his head. Haven't you ever been taught to speak better to your betters, woman? Lessons from arrogant pricks don't stick that well with me. Drake shot back just as quickly, although if you come over, I'd be sure to pay closer attention. She smirked, cracking her knuckles as she did so. Ha! Jason scoffed, as if I'd ever lower myself to step foot on that filthy hovel you call a ship. You should at least be ready to receive one of my stature in a more suitable. Now, Ritska shouted out. Jason blinked and then let out a shout as he ducked behind Heracles instantly. The second he did so, both Archer and Artemis opened fire on the Argo with dozens of arrows while Ash leapt into the air, cocking his sword back and building up a tornado of wind. Ha! Thrusting the blade downwards, Ash slammed the vortex into the surface of the water, instantly jarring the boat and causing the formation of a whirlpool to occur just next to it. Both Euryale and Rendell let out startled shouts of alarm as they stumbled about inside the rowboat. Asterios released a roar as he jumped off the Golden Hind, flying over the heads of Ritska and the others before crashing down into the water, kicking up an explosion almost as large as Ash's attack. Waves rocked the ship as Euryale clung onto the raft for dear life while Rendell steadied his footing. A large hand burst from beneath the waves, grasping around Euryale while the other one clasped around the side of the boat and hoisted itself up. Asterios emerged from the waves with a monstrous snarl aimed at Rendell. The knight widened his eyes as Asterios pushed the boat, capsizing it and sending the king splashing into the water while hoisting Euryale out of the boat and onto his shoulder. Faugh! Euryale continued to release a panicked scream as Asterios swam against the dying whirlpool, quickly clearing the distance and grasping onto the side of the ship, heaving himself up while the goddess tightly clung to the back of his neck. The moment Asterios reached the railings, several hands rushed over the side and grabbed onto him, pulling the servant back on board. Euryale-san retrieved, senpai. Mash cheered out. Retrieved. Euryale screamed, affronted, this is the worst rescue I've ever seen in my life. Splashing filthy sea water all over me, what is wrong with all of you? I believe it to be a better alternative to what was planned. Oscar tried to argue, turning around to face the Argo as the dust settled. Heracles stood undamaged and despite several cracks in the Argo itself, the ship had sustained minimal damage as well. The translucent barrier in front of Medea slowly dissipated while Canius looked marginally amused at the display. The woman moved to the side and peered over the railings as Rendell surfaced. Nice work there, she called down to him, you look like a fucking idiot. I'm not getting into a shouting match over this. Rendell scowled back at her as he swam to the side of the ship, clasping onto the oars and using them to pull himself up as he scaled the side of the ship and jumped back onto the deck. Soaking wet, I still have the Grail and we can easily reclaim the goddess. Canius scowled, tch, whatever, turning away from the knight and looking at the Golden Hind. You barbarians! Jason shouted out from behind Heracles before he soon began laughing, but as expected of villains. Indeed, you are proving to be the most infuriating foes. Clicking his tongue, he moved out from behind Heracles. But fine, he pointed at them, Heracles. Go kill them. The berserker opened his mouth. Ritska and Mash instantly covered their ears at the volume of the roar. Heracles took a single step forwards, tensing himself and then kicking off the deck of the Argo with enough force to shunt the ship backwards in his wake. Instantly clearing the distance between the two ships fast enough that Ritska couldn't even track him. Time seemed to slow down for Ritska as Heracles virtually appeared in front of him, slab sword already in mid-swing towards his head. And next chapter is Havel and Heracles fight. All that needs to be said. Okay, Canius or rather Canis is here as well. But this is heroic spirit Canis not divine spirit Canis is from my understanding, she only became a divine spirit due to Lost Belt shenanigans. So we have Canius. As to why she's here. Why not? No, she won't appear again after Okeanos. Her next return after this singularity is when she is meant to officially be summoned by Wodyme in Arc 2. But I couldn't help it.